IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, February 18th, and the offseason is rolling right along. Hope everybody had a good weekend. It's been a second since we've been live, so we are excited to bring you guys some awesome content today. We've been cranking things out on the board and different articles, other pieces of content, but we're excited to be back in front of everybody to talk about Notre Dame's offseason and how it's been progressing. So, Bryan, in today's show, we're going to be talking about a handful of different things. We're going to start out by talking about overviewing some of the changes this team has gone through in the offseason so far, more from the coaching staff perspective. It's been a lot of different staff changes. We're going to kind of recap everything, and then we're going to talk about is Notre Dame better off now? Are they worse or the same? We're going to give some reasons why, and then some potential changes that we might be waiting on. And then after that, we're going to dive into the offensive line. So far, we've been diving through the different position groups. We've talked quarterback. We've talked receiver a lot this offseason. Now we're going to take a deep dive into the offensive line. The first part, we're going to be talking about an honest recap of the 2024 season. We're going to talk about the good. We're going to talk about the not so good, which will transition nicely into what we expect for the 2025 offensive line. The offensive line is going to be key. We're going to talk through what they need to do to be successful for Notre Dame to make another appearance in the college football playoff semifinals to give themselves a shot at another national title. And then at the end of all of that today, Bryan, we're going to do a mailbag. So everybody throughout the show, please be sure that you get your questions in, whether it's something that pops in your head at the time or if it's something that's been marinating a little bit over the long weekend, it's felt like. So make sure you get your questions in throughout the show. We're going to do a mailbag for about an hour after the show ends, and then obviously super chats get bumped to the top. But before we start all that, Bryan, how you doing today, man?
I am great. I'm excited, man. Obviously, absence makes the heart grow fonder, and I had a little absence from y'all yesterday. It was good. I had to, sometimes, especially this time of year, we're finishing up taxes and a lot of different things, and so sometimes just the business side of running Irish Breakdown kind of requires a little bit more attention. So I had to get some of that stuff caught up, and I'm working on our new schedule of kind of not our new schedule, but just kind of plotting out what we're going to discuss here these next few months and some different ideas we have and getting everybody on the same page. So had to get all that taken care of. So that's what yesterday was all about. Couldn't do it on Sunday because, well, I'm trying to have more Sabbath days, but also Sunday was, my wife's birthday. So I was a little busy with that on Sunday. But I'm back here, man, rocking and rolling. I'm ready to go. This is going to be an interesting conversation, in my opinion, Trev, because, look, when you have the success Notre Dame had, you're going to lose coaches. The way to maintain excellence as a program is that you continue to make sure when you lose coaches that you don't take a step back with their replacements. There's this notion, I think, that we have, and it's understandable with Notre Dame fans because these moves in the past have been so hit or miss. Like when you lose Bob Diaco, who did I thought a great job at Notre Dame, and you replace him with Brian Van Gorder, which is a train wreck, and then he gets replaced with Mike Elko, which is a great hire. And then you replace him with Clark Lee, which is a great hire. Then Marcus Freeman, which is a great hire. And then Al Golden, which was a great hire. And you got to keep that rolling. And then Chad Bowden did a great job. Can you replace the job he did? Dylan McCullough's an elite running backs coach. Could you replace that? They've done some analysts off the field hires that have been interesting because that's a group of people that don't get as much credit because in the past they didn't have as big of a say in what was going on. A lot of them was just like doing some future analysis or holding bags or, helping out whenever you could. You weren't really important. Well, now analysts are doing so much more and they're being asked to do so much more that how well you do there has a big say on who you're going to be. So as a football team and how well you're coached. So there's just a lot of different things going on right now. Retaining as many of your coaches as you can is important. We'll talk about that a little bit during the show. And then, of course, the offensive line needs to be elite this year, Trev. That's there's no doubt. I mean, if this team is going to get back to the national title game and have a chance to win it this time, the offensive line has to get back to where we perceive it is when it's at its best. It has to be elite. It has to be one of the 3 or 4 best offensive lines in the country. And more importantly, it has to be there when it matters most because, it wasn't always the case this season. And there's a lot of different reasons why, and we'll get into those, but it's an important topic. It really is. And I'm excited to talk about both of these. And we talked about quarterback, we've talked about safeties, receivers, and we'll have more on the receivers as we get into this. But I really think this offensive line conversation is huge and things that we're excited about, things that we're concerned about that we're going to dive into, and just trying to have an honest conversation. Because I feel like with this offensive line talk, Trev, there's a lack of we're doing so much of this. Well, I either have to support everything as is and gloss over any issues, and it's elite and it's great and it's this, or it's I do nothing but criticize, and we're not having an honest discussion. There's some really good things that we saw from the O-line this year, players-wise, coaching-wise, and some troubling things that we saw this year, player-wise and coaching-wise. And you're not a bad fan if you're like, yeah, it needs to get better from a coaching standpoint, or hey, maybe that wasn't good enough. And I feel like we're in these really weird, like cultish camps now where you have to support everything that the coaches say or do, or you're a bad fan. And it's like, no, I'm not a cult member, so I don't have to agree with anything anybody says. But you also don't need to be that person who's like unnecessarily critical of everything. Let me always look to find fault in something. And I think there's a really healthy balance, especially the offensive line, where I feel like that's where there's been the most of this push-pull of those two camps, right? And we're going to have an honest conversation today about what went well, what still needs to be better, and how those things can kind of factor in to get the 25 offensive line in a position where it should dominate. And that's the one thing that I think both camps will agree on is 25 needs to be dominant and has a chance to be dominant. The question is going to be, can it get there? So that's what I'm looking forward to talking about. I always love some offensive line play. But these are going to be fun talks. And obviously, if you guys want – and also, just so you guys know, mailbags don't always just have to be questions. If you got something you want to say, hey, listen, here's my thoughts on this, or I have this opinion or that opinion, you go ahead and put that in there too. Just still put MB on there, and we'll be able to tell the difference between a question and a comment. But get those in, and it doesn't have to just be about the topic today. But I like hearing from you guys. When we're talking about these different things, I want to hear what you guys think about it. And here, when we talk about this coach leaving and that coach arriving, we want to hear your thoughts too. That's what makes the chat fun. Sometimes they go off these things where they're just talking about something that's nothing to do with the show, and it's distracting because we're trying to stay engaged on the chat as well. But it's also because I get disappointed because I want to hear what you guys think about things too. That's part of the fun of doing the show is like, hey, here's where we're at, but what do you guys think? And so I'm also looking forward to hearing some of that feedback as well. And yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. So Trev, I'm ready to rock and roll. And I think diving into this coaches conversation is going to be a good place to start because we're not completely done yet, but we have an idea of there's still some analyst hires that need to be made, but all the big decisions have been made with the exception of one. And we can at least talk enough about what that needs to be to kind of get an idea of where things are headed with the coaching staff. And then we're talking on-field and off-field coaching staff.
So let's jump in head first here, Bryan, and talk about the first change. And it was one of the bigger, if not the biggest change of the offseason. Defensive coordinator Al Golden departs to head off to the NFL to be the new defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. And it came at a time very fresh off of the loss in the national championship game. Yeah. Which I think for me personally, and it sounds like everybody else in the chat, it kind of hit a little bit harder where 72 hours after Notre Dame loses the national championship, they lose their all-star defensive coordinator. But
was it even that? Was it even like it maybe it was official, but we kind of felt like the next day. I mean, there was already stuff coming out before the game where it was like so Trev, we knew it was going to happen, but it still kind of stung, it's like when it becomes official, it's like, man, it's like, I now know what salt in the wounds feels like.
I hear you. But it didn't take Marcus Freeman long to find Al Golden's replacement. He found that in Chris Ash, who has spent the last couple seasons in the NFL, couple as a position coach with the Las Vegas Raiders, and most recently on the Jaguars front office staff. But he does have experience as a defensive coordinator in 2020 at Texas, as well as being the defensive coordinator for the 2014 and the 2015 Ohio State teams and a handful of other schools before that, Wisconsin. He was the head coach at Rutgers, not really weighing too much in his experience and his qualifications to be a defensive coordinator. But, Bryan, that's where we're at. Chris Ash was hired to replace Al Golden. So when we talk through this replacement, and this is one that we've covered pretty consistently throughout the offseason between buy-sell holds and mailbags, where do you start when you look at this one?
Look, we've talked about our opinion of the hire. That's not the point of what we're going to discuss today. But I did want to point out something, because there has been this talk kind of going around. I had even a good friend of mine the other day called me, and pretty connected to the program, and he talked about, like, do you really feel like Notre Dame is too reactionary with these hires? And one of them was the Chris Ash thing, and as if like he's like he makes the comment, and again, from an outside standpoint, I get this point of view, and that's why we want to address it, not as a criticism of the perception, but just to give some clarity to the situation, which is there's this thought, like, was Marcus Freeman really not prepared for Al Golden to leave? And that's how he got, quote unquote, stuck with Chris Ash. And my comment is, the thing we have to understand is we all have our opinions of whether or not Chris Ash is a good hire or not. And ultimately, we're going to find out over the next couple years. And I don't even think just 1 year is going to tell us, because we could go out there and watch Notre Dame put an elite defense on the field, and it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a great hire in long term, because you and I are of the belief that you've got to be a complete idiot to screw this defense up in 2025. If you can't put a top 10 defense on the field in 2025 with the talent they got coming back, you're not a very good football coach. So even if there's a success, does that mean that it can be long-term success? We're going to find out over the course of time. And the one thing we can all agree on is that we all hope this ends up being a great hire. And as I look at a lot of the hires that Marcus Freeman made, as more decisions have been made this offseason, it's not that my opinion of this move with Chris Ash changes, because I still hold the same opinion of Chris Ash, because it's based off breaking down what he's done and analyzing what he's done. Nothing is going to change that until I see new evidence. But when you watch Marcus Freeman kind of hit home run after home run after home run after home run following the Chris Ash hire, it kind of says, okay, I feel how I feel about this Chris Ash hire. But man, Marcus Freeman's been on a roll these last 2 off seasons of hiring coaches. Maybe he sees something we don't. And while it's not going to change my spoken words about it, because I can only be honest about what I know and what I see, it does maybe give me a little bit more peace that I might be wrong about this one. And this is one of those instances where I want to be wrong. And that's kind of how I feel about it, Trevor. I don't know how you feel, but like, as the more he's made moves this offseason, the more I'm like, okay, my opinion's not going to change, but I'm more, maybe optimistic that I'm going to be wrong about how this move is going to impact the program.
I'm in a similar boat for reasons along those lines. For the Marcus Freeman's track record so far this postseason with hires and what he did this past postseason with hires, it kind of puts some of my reservations at bay a little bit. But also you go and look at the remainder of the defensive coordinator landscape, like the big names. You have guys like DJ Durkin signing an extension at Auburn. You have Ohio State going and hiring Matt Patricia. You want to talk about a defensive coordinator hire that raises a lot of question marks. I thought I had mine with Chris Ash. Matt Patricia coming in as a defensive coordinator also raises a bunch of different questions. Another topic for another day, perhaps. But you go through and you look at the track record of what Marcus Freeman has done, compounded with what has happened in the remaining landscape of college football. Yes, Tom Allen is now at Penn State, Tom Allen is now at Clemson, and Jim Knowles is now at Penn State. I understand that those are some of the bigger names. Tom Allen was going back home. He was going back to where he was comfortable. I understand that. It would have made no sense for a guy like Tom Allen to go to South Bend, Indiana. At that point, he should have just stayed in Happy Valley. And you go through and you look at Jim Knowles heading off to Penn State, wanted to stay within conference. He's going to somewhere that has a good foundation for a defense, and he did his job at Ohio State. I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons behind the curtain that we may or may not see, because I am not an Ohio State football insider. I'm a Notre Dame football insider. So there's probably some question marks that we don't know. But you go through and you look at what the rest of the landscape of college football has shown. That has also, on top of all the reasons that you said, Bryan, those are all the reasons why I feel a little bit more, I'm going to say, open to this hire. Because before it was very, why didn't you make this move? This is what made the most sense. It felt like you made this move extremely quickly, which does beg the question to your friend's point that reached out to you. This move was made so quickly that, was it very reactionary or was it very planned? Not saying that Chris Ash was receiving phone calls.
And that's the thing. I know for a fact that there was at least one other coach that Marcus Freeman reached out to and was sort of his top guy. And we've all heard it. It's Jim Leonard. And then he turned down overtures from Ohio State also. So he didn't just turn down Marcus Freeman. He also turned down Ohio State. And then he quickly moved on to Chris Ash. So we can discuss and debate whether it's the right move or the right hire, or was it smart or not smart or anything in between. But what it wasn't was reactionary from the sense of what it was intended. Obviously, when you get turned down by a coach, your reaction is to go to somebody else. So in the truest technical sense, it was reactionary. But my point is, reactionary is more of like oh, shoot, I wasn't prepared for that. Now I got to scramble to make a move. And that's how the question was intended. But the reality is this was a calculated move by Marcus Freeman. We'll debate whether it was correct or not correct, but it wasn't reactionary. This is, here's my top guy or two. If that doesn't work, this is where I'm going. And this is a guy that Marcus Freeman was a defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. At the same time, he was a defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, Marcus Freeman being at Purdue, and then Chris Ash being at Wisconsin, and then, of course, Ohio State. So there's some familiarity with what he does. And so that's the thing that I think we just need to understand about this hire is it wasn't reactionary. It wasn't a panic hire. Marcus Freeman, and we've seen this with other hires, he has been in no rush to make the GM hire. He's in no rush to make the recruiting coordinator hire. He wasn't in a rush to make the D coordinator hire. He wasn't in a rush to make the running back hire, even though they all happened quickly. It's just he knew who his targets were. He went after them and got them. And then we'll find out down the road if these were the right hires. And that's something I do think we at least need to give him credit for, is we'll find out whether it was the right move or not. But these were calculated decisions by Marcus Freeman. And that's a good thing. It wasn't a, oh, shoot, I got turned down by Jim Leonard. What do I do now? It was like this is where I'm going. And I think that is, that is still something that we're going to do. Because here's the reality. Here's what we know for a fact, Trev. Here's the one thing we can all agree on. This hire is going to have a huge impact on whether or not Notre Dame can continue to ascend under Marcus Freeman. Look, he has to. The coordinator hires have to be home runs. You can't miss on those, especially the defensive one, because that's what you say your program is going to be about. This has to be a big hire. This has to be an important hire. And it can't be, if it's not a good hire, Freeman can help with. No. He needs to be the head football coach, not somebody who's got to rescue the defensive coordinator he hired who struggled. It's got to be the right hire. We're going to find out if it is, but that's what's on the line here with this hire. And I think we can all at least have a sense of confidence that we all believe that Marcus Freeman's a pretty smart defensive guy, as when we understand that this was not a panic move or a reactionary move, a move where he's settling, but this is where he wanted to go once his top target left. I think that there's at least a sense of, okay, I have trust in him, so I'm optimistic that it's going to work out, even though I'm going to be honest about my opinions of Chris Ash. I have a little bit more confidence, and you nailed on something too, Trev. Once Matt Patricia got hired at Ohio State, I'm like, you know what? I feel way better about the Chris Ash hire, because my thing on Chris Ash is he's not a bad coordinator. I question if he's a championship coordinator. Yes, he's got a championship, but if you can't run a solid defense when you have the talent they had on their team in 2015, you need to find a new profession. It's just that, is he that kind of guy in the modern era? That's the other part of it too. Even if we granted that he was elite back at Wisconsin, Ohio State, and I used to be very high on Chris Ash as an assistant coach, I heard some things about him and how he interacts and treats people that has me concerned. But we all have those moments. I talked about him in our last show about how, boy, I wish I would have conducted myself with more maturity or patience or whatever the case may be back in when I first got started into this. And I wasn't 21 years old. You know what I mean? Like I was in my 30s, late 20s and 30s when I was really getting into this kind of stuff. So we all have those moments where we can bounce back and recover. And I hope that Coach has been able to do that. But it's more so also the adjustment to the modern game, because we haven't seen, he's been a coordinator for 1 year in the last decade, and it didn't go well. And we've talked about some reasons why it's hard to really gauge that. He was taking over a bad defense during the COVID year where they had no offseason, couldn't do install, couldn't do this, couldn't do that. But you have those questions of, okay, can he really adjust to the modern game? Bob Diaco's big failure as a defensive coordinator post Notre Dame was that he couldn't adjust his scheme to the modern game. He was a 3-4 guy. He can handle, back in 2010 to 2012 when Notre Dame had good defenses every year, he can handle Michigan's offense. He can handle Michigan State's offense. He can handle the things that a lot of teams were doing because they were line up and play. He could play his 3-4 defense. And now you can't just line up in a base 3-4 defense and play that level of big boy football. Purdue tried it this year, and they got annihilated because you can't play that kind of football anymore. The game's changed, not as your base 3-down defense. And Bob Diaco just never adjusted to the modern game. Now, he still has chances. He just got hired this offseason as a linebackers coach at North Carolina. So there's always those opportunities of it, but that's been an issue for him. And we're going to find out if Chris Ash has done that. And with Chris Ash, it's not so much we've seen him fail at it. It's just we haven't seen him do it in so long that we just don't know. But I have to think that him and Marcus Freeman had some of those conversations where Marcus Freeman felt good about that. Now we got to see if it's going to get played out because ultimately this is the biggest hire he made this offseason. This is the biggest hire he made this offseason. It's going to have the most immediate impact on his team. If Mike Martin's a grand slam home run hire, it's going to have very little impact on the 2025 football team. Very little. Mike Martin is going to have a huge immediate impact on like recruiting and the transfer portal and things that will affect future teams, obviously, and then keeping this team together. But unless, it comes down to I should say there will be some aspects of Mike Martin that will impact, the portal of guys not going into the portal. But for the most part, his big impact will be on next season. This one is going to have a big impact on this upcoming season. And that's why it's important. And so is the other one, Trev, which just got officially announced by Notre Dame as we started our show. We knew this was going to happen. Penn State's already replaced him. So it was going to happen. But obviously Notre Dame officially announced that Jawan Sider is the new running backs coach, which is the other big hire that Marcus Freeman made from a coaching staff standpoint this offseason.
It's going to be a huge impact. I mean, outside of the Chris Ash hire, this is kind of the next hire that you're going to see immediate impact in 2025 for. Marcus Freeman was tasked with replacing Dylan McCullough, who made the decision to go and follow Chip Kelly to the Las Vegas Raiders for the head.
He went with Pete Carroll more than Chip Kelly. It was more about Pete Carroll than it was Chip Kelly. Yeah,
sure. I'm not saying it was but he very closely behind Chip Kelly went to the Las Vegas Raiders to be on Pete Carroll's newly rebuilt coaching staff, which left Notre Dame with a hold. I mean, everybody was boasting, us included, about how successful Notre Dame's running back room was in 2024, and they returned every single person from that unit outside of Devin Ford for 2025. So this hire for this position group specifically was a monumental hire, and they had to find somebody who knows how to balance a deep running back rotation. Penn State's coming off of a year where they had two running backs go over 1,000 yards in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. Notre Dame has a lot of mouths to feed in that room. Jeremiah Love and J.D. Price for starters. Now you have Aeneas Williams, who showed his worth in the postseason. Kedron Young is going to be fighting for more carries. Jabron Payne could potentially come back healthy this year. Nolan James is coming in as a true freshman. And Notre Dame has kind of started to string together a streak of playing good true freshman running backs. I would not be surprised if Nolan James adds his name to that group of people. So it's going to be interesting to see how Jawan Siders manages that. But Marcus Freeman needed to find somebody, one, that was proven at that position, and he was at Penn State, knows how to rotate a group of running backs with a lot of talent who all need to see the field. And they had to find somebody that's an elite recruiter. Some impact might be felt initially with some of the names on the board, but that impact is going to be seen more throughout his tenure at Notre Dame than just outside of right now to August 31st. But there will still be an impact nonetheless. So, Brian, when you go through and you look at the hire of Jawan Siders that Notre Dame just made official, when he's replacing Dylan McCullough, big shoes to fill, as you and I both know. How do we feel about this hire, man?
Really big shoes. I mean, look, when you lose a coach like Dylan McCullough, I don't know that there's hey, are you going to upgrade into position? It's like, that's not really the point. And yeah, I've been asked this question a lot. Who's better, Dylan McCullough or Jawan Sider? Who's better between those two and Tony Alford? And it's like, that's not how I look at it. It's like, are you elite or are you not? And I don't look at it as like, well, this guy's number one and this guy's number two and this guy's number three. I don't really care about that because it's hard to compare that because you're at different places with different circumstances. But here's what I know. Notre Dame lost an outstanding football coach in Dylan McCullough. They lost an outstanding recruiter when Dylan McCullough left. They lost an outstanding mentor to young men when Dylan McCullough left. And to me, all three of those things are vitally important. Now, I don't know a lot about Jawan Sider as a mentor to young men. I've heard he's a really good guy. I've heard he cares about those things. I just can't speak to that one way or the other because I just don't know him well enough, and I'm not inside that program. I have talked to people around the program that have said really good guy and have said all the right things, but now we just need to see it. So I'm not commenting on that other than he's got to be good there because Dylan McCullough was great there. That's as much about developing. When I've said so many times, when the players believe in you off the field, they will give you everything they've got on the field. But you look at the track record and you say, okay, with what I'm hearing and then what we see on the field, you kind of feel like there's a really good chance that part's going to be there. But here's what we do know. He's an outstanding running backs coach for what happens on the field, and he's an outstanding recruiter for what he's brought into that program. And when you talk about like ranking the top running back coaches, I don't rank them, but I know there's a group of guys that are considered the best of the best, guys that I consider the best of the best, and Jawan Sider's in that conversation. When Dylan McCullough left, I had a couple people ask me, like, if you're Marcus Freeman, do you talk to Jawan Sider? And I was like, well, yeah, you talk to him, and then when he tells you no, you move on to the next guy. Why is he going to leave Penn State to come to Notre Dame? He's got a great situation there. Well, I'm glad Marcus Freeman made the call because this was a big-time home run hire. When you lose a coach like Dylan McCullough and you feel like your replacement is on that level of big time, and I don't care whether you're 1, 2, or 3, it's big time and big time. That's what matters. You lost a big-time coach who did great things for your program, and you're replacing him with a big-time coach who did great things for the program he just left. And to me, that's an absolute grand slam home run hire. Did they upgrade, downgrade? I don't know all that. But what I know is they lost an elite coach and they replaced him with an elite coach. And that is savvy work done there by Marcus Freeman. And he did it quick. Now, the reason he did it quick is because, again, he has a list of guys he was going to turn to. Dylan McCullough is always the guy that you have to be concerned about leaving in the offseason because he's coveted. Because he's an elite coach every offseason. And Dylan McCullough has turned down NFL offers every year that he's been, including when he got hired by Notre Dame, there was immediately NFL teams that started coming after him again. And he turned them down. And he turned them down after the 2022 season. He turned them down after the 2023 season. And he turned down jobs in this past offseason. But when Pete Carroll came calling, that was too much. And there was a connection there. He did sort of a mentorship, not a mentorship, but like they have this thing where college coaches will work with NFL teams, and he did a program with Pete Carroll when he was with the Seahawks. His dad coached with Pete Carroll for a while. We did confirm that it was with the Seahawks, or he was with the Seahawks. We did confirm that it was with Pete Carroll, other way around. And so there was a clear connection there. And Pete Carroll's a Hall of Fame coach. I mean, you say whatever you want, but the guy won multiple national titles in college and won a Super Bowl in the NFL and was in 3 total Super Bowls or 2? Is it 2? I know he's with they played the Patriots, and I know that they played they beat the Broncos. But let me go look at that.
Steelers.
That was, I think, under Mike Holmgren. I think that was Mike Holmgren, but I could be wrong on that. I'm going to go look at that real quick because he was with the Seahawks from 2010 to 2023, won a Super Bowl. Let's see here in his tenure, they got to the Super Bowl. Won 2 national titles, got to the Super Bowl with Seattle twice. It was back-to-back years. So they made it in 2012. They went to the divisional game, won the Super Bowl in 13, went back to the Super Bowl in 14. We're in the playoffs 5 of the next 6 years, and finished with 137 and 89 record with the Seahawks. Went 10-9 in the postseason. He's a Hall of Fame coach. And when you look at the entirety of kind of what he's done on college and the NFL. So, and now that's one of those ones where it's like, and it's the Raiders. I mean, look, as a Broncos fan, I hate the Raiders. And so it's like, I hope Coach McCullough's running backs go for 200 yards a game during their 0-17 season. That's kind of how I feel about it. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I feel about the Raiders. But it's the Raiders, man. It's one of those iconic franchises, and it just was an opportunity too good to pass up. And so Marcus Freeman wisely always had sort of a, here's my list of guys I'm turning to if Dylan McCullough leaves. And I put on the message board, I put an intel piece on how it all went down. Dylan McCullough did it the right way. Pete Carroll did it the right way. And then Marcus Freeman did it the right way. In that there was a question, hey, are you interested? Yes, immediately get off the phone, call Marcus Freeman. Hey, coach, I'm interested in him. Do I have your blessing to talk to him? Coach Freeman gave it, and then they did a formal interview, and the rest is kind of history. So I gained a lot of respect for all three of those men and how this process went down. But Marcus Freeman's tasked with, okay, I lost a great coach. Now I got to turn to it, and immediately turned to Jawan Sider. And I'm surprised that the interest was there. I just assumed, like, you've got this great situation coming back at Penn State. Why would you want to leave? But there's a lot of different reasons why we don't need to get into, but there's few jobs that can get you to leave a situation like that. And Notre Dame is one of those jobs just in general. But when you say, I'm not losing anything from a talent standpoint, and maybe I'm getting a slight upgrade in talent on top of all the other things that make Notre Dame a better job, it was impossible to pass up, I believe, is just what it comes down to it. And look, you're at a place long enough, Trev. There eventually comes a point in time where it's like, I've gone as far as I go in this at this place, and it's time for a fresh start. And I think that played a role in it well. But at the end of the day, here's what matters: he made a home run hire for running backs coach, and this offense is not going to miss a beat when it comes to the staff from what it was. And that's not acting as if Dylan McCullough's easy to replace. He's not, which is what makes this such an impressive move by Marcus Freeman, to be able to lose a coach like that and replace him with a coach like Jawan Sider is big time.
If you wanted an example of Marcus Freeman's confidence in himself and his coaching staff and his philosophy, it's the entire process of the Dylan McCullough hire, in my opinion. And those are the things that you love to hear about. Why do people want to come work for Marcus Freeman? Well, there's a lot of stories about, he's an up-and-coming coach. He works really well with the staff. He's a family-first guy. The players, the kids love him. But supporting your coaching staff goes a really, really long way. It would have been really easy for Marcus Freeman, a guy who loves Dylan McCullough and has a good relationship with him, who has given Notre Dame's running back room a lot of success. It would have been easy for him to say, do I have your blessing for this? It's, no, man, I need you here at Notre Dame. But he wants not just his players, but the coaches that work with him and work under him to go off and be successful in their own careers, whether that be at Notre Dame or not. And then to have the confidence in yourself to go out and meet and interview and get a guy like Jawan Sider, I think is huge. So this entire hiring process gave me even more confidence moving forward that Marcus Freeman's just that dude right now for Notre Dame. Everybody talks about being an up-and-coming coach in college football, and a lot of that is the product on the field. But how do you get the product on the field? By doing things the right way, Sunday to Friday, by doing the right things in the offseason with your coaching staff. And that's what Marcus Freeman continued to do. So
now look, if Dylan McCullough wanted to go to the Raiders, there was nothing that Marcus Freeman could do about it. That's not the point. The point is, but you can do it. There's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. And I think they all three did it the right way. And that's the coaching profession. That's the reality. You give me, and the thing I like about Marcus Freeman is, like, look, I don't care if you're with me for a year, 2 years, 3, but when you're here, you give me everything you've got. And Dylan McCullough did that as in every phase, as a coach, as a recruiter, and as a mentor of young men. And he did it with integrity. I mean, we've shared stories about how that has come to fruit, and how that paid off for Notre Dame from a recruiting standpoint. And then be able to go out there and hire a guy with a similar reputation. Because, like, what's the big concern when you lose a guy like Dylan McCullough? All right, well, he had to work his tail off to keep everybody on the roster, to make sure guys weren't leaving, because I can assure you that Notre Dame's entire backfield was getting offers to leave. Not just Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price. All of them were getting offers to leave. And he kept them all here. So then the concern is, well, you got a new runner. You're going to get a new coach. If you don't make a good big splash, it's going to be like, well, screw this. I'm not. But when you make a move like Jawan Sider, obviously he'll have to connect with the new players and all that type of stuff. But from a reputation standpoint, I think it gives a little peace of mind to the coaches or to the players and their families that, oh man, Marcus Freeman is making big moves, and there was no downtime. I mean, Dealin made his decision on Monday or Tuesday, and by Sunday we had word that this was the move. And it was like, man, so there was no time to allow other people get in there really and warp their minds about the uncertainty of what's coming next. It was like, before you could even do that, boom, we're not only got a new coach, it's a home run. So I just think that adds to the success of this offseason. And we'll move to the analysts next, but obviously we put an intel piece on the board yesterday that, Mike Mickens put an Instagram post out a couple days ago. Trev, you and I were talking about it a little bit yesterday, and we're like, I hope it means what it looks like it means. Talk to a source, it definitely does. Mike Mickens is staying at Notre Dame. That was another big win, because by not promoting him to D coordinator, Marcus Freeman took a big risk that he wasn't going to lose Mike Mickens this offseason. And Mike Mickens has decided to stay. He had been courted by other programs, but he's decided to stay for this next season, which is huge for Notre Dame, because if you lost Al Golden and Mike Mickens in one offseason, that would have been incredibly challenging to overcome. Incredibly challenging to overcome. But now the only question is, for this to be a success, does Chris Ash show the same reverence and respect to Mike Mickens that Al Golden did? That's going to be a big question mark to how well this works. Does Chris Ash say, I got great resources here, let me use them? Or does he come in saying, it's my way and I'm the dude and I'm all this and I'm all those other type of things? So I'm not saying he's going to do that at all. I'm simply saying that is going to be what determines if this ends up being great, that these two guys are going to be able to work well together. It's going to be that. It's going to be how well those two guys can work well together and say, hey, let's bring some great things to this program for however long we're together. That's going to be a big part of, does all this work for me?
Sure. I mean, real quick, going back to our conversation around Chris Ash, another reason why I am more open to this hire is because every single position coach comes back on the defensive side as well. As of today, Al Washington's still there. Max Bull is still there. Mike Mickens is still there. Marty Biaggi did some stuff with the safeties this past season under the coaching of Mike Mickens, but all of them returned to the defensive staff as of today. And that's another reason why I do feel pretty good or better about the Chris Ash situation. Now, moving on.
The whole freaking offseason. I mean, honestly, keeping Mike Mickens is huge. I mean, absolutely huge, because like Dylan McCullough did a great job, but we've seen running back coaches have success at Notre Dame. He replaced a pretty good coach himself. And then there was the Audrey Denson tenure, which wasn't great, but he replaced Tony Alford, who did a great job. I mean, it's not, I thought Bernie Parmalee did some nice things back under Charlie Weiss. It's like Notre Dame has had some success there in the past. Secondary has been a different animal. It hasn't been a strength very much for Notre Dame. And the way that Mike Mickens has completely turned that thing around, you're almost like, normally when you think of like irreplaceable coaches, say to a degree, there's no such thing, but you can get close to it. You think of like coordinators and offensive line coaches and stuff like that. That's Mike Mickens for Notre Dame. Again, no one's completely irreplaceable, but it's a much tougher task to replace him, and you don't have to worry about that for another year. So that's big news for Notre Dame, being able to keep Mike Mickens, because to your point, you're adding Chris Ash to a staff that also has an elite the secondary coach, and has a quality defensive line coach and an up and coming guy as a linebackers coach. And then of course Marcus Freeman's made a couple other moves this offseason, Trev, which we'll just kind of quickly mention. Notre Dame's lost some analysts. There's still some analyst roles and some GA roles to fill. They've lost several coaches, which is you're going to have a lot of turnover in that department. They lost their receivers guy to the NFL. They lost one of their DB guys. They lost a D-line guy or a defensive assistant, Mike Moon. And they've made 2 moves this week. I don't think either of them are necessarily official yet, but they're both going to happen. And first one was reported earlier in the week, and that is Javon Codlin, who was an assistant secondary coach with West Virginia the last couple of years, who's had a pretty good secondary. Reached out to a buddy of mine who is close to that program. Here's what he had to say to me. I asked him about Javon Codlin. He said, great recruiter. He says he's very young, still a lot to learn, but I think the kid has a very bright future. And so he's going to be brought in, and he's going to get a chance to learn under Mike Mickens and Chris Ash. Heard a lot of good things about him. Again, I love the part how he's known as a really good recruiter and, up-and-coming coach. That was a good one. And then the other one is they hired Dom Spalding, who's going to be an analyst working with the wide receivers. That was announced today, or reported today by John Bryce at Football Scoop. John Bryce had that, right? Isn't that? I think that's who I retweet. Yes, John Bryce had that one. And it was with Northwestern last year, spent several years with the Youngstown State. These are both guys that have coaching experience. They're not just new guys. They're not guys fresh out of college. They're young, but they're young guys that have coached for several years. And I think that's an important part of this too, Trev, is, they're adding quality young coaches. And that's where I think a lot of the Marcus Freeman effect is coming into play, Trev, is like there's a reputation. This is a guy that you want to coach with and coach for. And, and I've heard of some issues at times, and maybe we'll dive into a little bit more down the road. But there were some disagreements at times this year between the recruiting staff and the coaches, and Marcus Freeman would always take the side of the coaches. That stuff matters, and that stuff spreads. When they go to these coaches' clinics and these conventions and this stuff, that stuff spreads. You know who you want to work for and who you don't want to work for. And that's why you're seeing a lot of these moves happen for Notre Dame. And so just overall, I think I'll say this just from an on-field standpoint, Trevor, you knew that you were going to lose coaches. My final takeaway, they didn't lose as much as I thought they were going to lose. Mike Brown turned down an NFL receiver's job. I know that Al Washington has turned down some opportunities so far. I know that Marty Biagi's turned down some opportunities and overtures this offseason. Obviously, Joe Rudolph interviewed with the Bears. They haven't lost so far as many coaches as we expect. Now, things could change, but it's not going to change where, like, all of a sudden 4 guys are gone between now and spring ball. But for the most part, they didn't change as much. They didn't lose as much as I thought they were going to lose. And I think that some of the replacements they've had have been really big. And if Chris Ash is what we think Marcus Freeman thinks he is, this is going to be a really good situation for Notre Dame. Very good situation.
The only other hire that was made that we haven't talked about yet, we'll keep it brief because we did have a segment on this in a previous show, was Mike Martin replacing Chad Bowden as the new GM for Notre Dame. Now, there's some different thoughts on what his management's going to be of the team. What we know right now is he's going to be in charge of or overseeing a lot of the duties with roster maintenance and maintaining the current roster, doing things in the transfer portal. Excuse me. And it's a big hire. I voiced my opinion on it when it was announced. I love the fact that they got an NFL guy with a background, especially with a team like the Detroit Lions, to come in and step into this role vacated by Chad Bowden. So for me, it's the other hire, the other big hire that was made this offseason. And Brian, you touched on it earlier. We're going to see more of his impact down the road.
Yeah.
If we all believe his impact is what it's going to be
on the field. Yes. We should start to see an impact right away from a recruiting standpoint and an operational standpoint. But in regard to like how it impacts the team, it's more 26 and beyond. We won't spend a whole lot of time on this one, Trev, because we did break this down like very recently. I think our Wednesday show, right? I think is what we talked about at the beginning of our Wednesday or Thursday show last week. But my big takeaway is I love the direction that Marcus Freeman is going structurally. The remaining big hire left is the recruiting coordinator, recruiting director, whatever they're going to call it. That's the one thing out there. There's been some reports that somebody at Auburn was like the guy. That was a false report. That's another example of the media being used, or sometimes in this case, I think willfully being used to help a coach get a pay raise and to pump his own reputation, which is fine. It's part of the business. There was definitely interest from Notre Dame. I'm not going to deny that, but it was never he's the only guy. We want him so badly. Oh, geez, he turned us down to stay at Auburn. There were several candidates for this position. Marcus Freeman had not settled in on one guy just yet. And there are still other guys kind of working their way towards it. So, to me, that's something I look at, Trev, and say that hire is going to be big, but that guy's going to work with underneath now the GM. And so Mike Martin is going to run sort of the overall operation of putting a roster together. And there's a lot we have to learn yet, which is why we're not going to spend a whole lot more time on it. What's the relationship going to be like between his group and the assistant coaches? What's it going to be like with his group and the recruiting team? Does the recruiting team work under him, or do they work for him? There's a difference, and one way works and one way won't work. You've got to hire someone and this is also why I think not going to a recruiting coordinator just yet could be good, because he needs to have a say in who that's going to be. That's why the whole "this is our guy" thing before Mike Martin was announced was always kind of, no, it's not what they're saying it is, because he was going to have a say in this. And that's kind of, it matters, because this guy's going to work with him very closely. He needs to have a say on who that person's going to be. And we're going to find out what that's going to look like. But I just structurally, I like that Marcus Freeman's splitting that into two jobs. That's the one thing we said day one. I said, I don't know who the next GM is going to be, or whatever the case is going to be. There's good candidates out there, but I want it to be split in between two roles. Would I have been happy with James Blanchard putting it all under one? Totally fine, because I think he would have been a home run hire in that regard. But I just see the way this is going, I see it the same way Marcus Freeman sees it, that this has to be somewhat of a split role, where one guy looks at a bigger picture, he's into evaluation, he's doing this, and the other group is more of just the grind, the recruiters, the visits, the doing all that kind of stuff. And I just think that that's going to work really well together. And that doesn't mean the recruiting director won't be vitally important. I mean, that's where I want to go get the next Chad Bowden. I didn't want the next Chad Bowden as a GM. That's a different role than what Chad Bowden was great at. Chad Bowden is a grinder. He's an evaluator. He's a recruiter. Go get that kid. I still think they're looking to replace that hire directly. This is going to be more of an overseer on top of being a great evaluator. So I want people to make sure that they understand my overseer thing properly. I don't mean he's just a decision maker and he's the boss of everyone and he doesn't have day-to-day responsibilities from recruiting and evaluation. I'm not saying that at all. He's absolutely going to do that. But what I mean is he's the guy that has to keep everybody on the same page. And to do that, you can't be the guy that's on the phone all day calling high school kids, calling their parents, calling their coaches. That's what the recruiting director needs to be. You can't be on the road all the time. You can't be doing all that all the time. You need to be able to do that, but you also need to be able to have people that are doing a lot of that type of stuff. That's why you need Caleb Davis and Carter Allman, and that's why you need a recruiting director to kind of handle those responsibilities. And I would even grow that staff even more. Becca Seitz is someone else who's involved in a lot of that. You need those people. They're vitally important. And you can't be the one doing that as much as what Chad did as the GM. I think Chad was a phenomenal recruiting coordinator. I think you needed something different as a general manager in the direction that role, I think, is going in college football. And that was my big takeaway from that decision of bringing in Mike Martin. Because you're not bringing him in to be the next Chad Bowden. And I was told this by somebody. They're not looking to replace Chad with another Chad, and that wasn't meant to be a disrespectful thing. Notre Dame loves what he did. Marcus Freeman loves what he did. It's more so we're looking for a different type of not person, because that's going to make it seem like it's not about Chad directly, but it's more so what Chad was great at they're not necessarily looking for that same exact role as far as the day-to-day, the grinding, the recruiting. That's going to now be more of the recruiting coordinator. The GM is going to be a little bit different. So it's not that, oh, Chad didn't do a good job or what. It's just, it's going to be different than what the GM role was previously. And I think that's where they wisely are going with this move. And that's the big takeaway, more so than is Mike Martin good at it. We don't really know that yet. This is a different role for him. But everything I've heard so far has been great. Now we need to see how it plays out. But I just think structurally, I think that's the important thing that they're doing here.
So when you go through and you look at all the changes that Marcus Freeman had to overcome this offseason so far, and the important coaches to his staff, on the field coaches and off the field coaches that he had to replace, do you believe that Notre Dame is now better off? Are they in a worse position than what they were in 24? Are they the same, in your opinion, Bryan?
The answer, and I mean, you're asking this because I told you to ask it, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation, and I don't know that I necessarily have a strong answer. I think at the very least, I feel like Marcus Freeman was able to keep it to where it's going to be a stagnation for the on-the-field product, okay? So what I mean by that is, if you look at just the on-the-field coaching staff, I think at the very least next season, you're going to be every bit as good as you were this year. And here's why I say that. Do I know that Chris Ash is as good as Al Golden? I don't know that. That could be a slight step back. But the staff around him is now going into their second and third seasons minimum. Mike Mickens has been at Notre Dame since 2020. Al Washington was part of Marcus Freeman's initial staff, so he's going into year 4. And Max Bulla is going into his second year as a full-time coach, third year on staff. So that's a lot of people that know the kids, know the players, know what Marcus Freeman wants, which is going to help Chris Ash make a smoother transition. But then I look on the other side of the ball. You're going into year 2 of Mike Denbrock. I expect an improvement there. You're going into year 2 of Mike Brown being the receivers coach. I expect improvement there. You're going into year 3 of Joe Rudolph as the offensive line coach. There's continuity now. Yes, you're losing your running backs coach, but you're bringing in the same guy. You're now going to go into, was it year 2 or no, it'd be year 3 of your special teams coordinator, right? Because Brian Mason was only here the 1 year, correct? 2022. It's only a year he was here. So you're now going into year 3 of your special teams coordinator. So there's a lot more continuity now than there was a year ago. Because a year ago, well, I shouldn't say that. There's enough continuity at other positions to where it can hopefully help offset the fact that you have a new defensive coordinator, because you are returning your all coordinator, special teams coordinator, your head coach, almost all your position coaches, and then the one other position coach you had, because I don't count the coordinators anymore as position coaches. They're now just more coordinators. But you know, Mike Denbrock still coaches the tight ends, but there's help there, and it's a smaller position group. I mean, just the position coaches. You lost one, you made a great hire to replace him. I think at the minimum, you've been able to say we're going to be stagnant, right? And I shouldn't say stagnant, not a bad word. You're going to be on the same level at the minimum. And then if Chris Ash ends up being a good hire, then I think you're an even better staff next year than you were this year. Not because you have better people per se, but because there's so much more continuity than there was within the last. I mean, it's a lot of turnover on offense the last 2 years. I mean, you had 3 coordinators in 3 years. You went from Reese in 22 to Parker in 23 to Denbrock in 24. You had an offensive line changeover from 22 and 23. You had a receiver changeover from 23 to 24. You had a new tight ends coach in Mike Denbrock, who's also the new OC. You had a new linebacker coach last year. So you had, there's been, last year you were only going to year 2 of your special teams coordinator. It's been a lot of turnover. The moves this offseason were big in the type of coaches you lost, but they weren't voluminous, I think is the word that I'm looking for here, right? Or, there wasn't a lot of them. You only had to replace 2. And I think that's why I think at the very least you're here. Whether or not it's better or you've upgraded because of all the extra things is going to be determined by how well Chris Ash can replace Al Golden. If Chris Ash can keep this thing rolling, then I think Notre Dame's going to be an even better coach team next year than they were this year because of all the continuity now that we see on offense. That can help overcome that loss. And if Chris Ash does a good job, because he also is surrounded by people that have been here for a while. I think it helps this thing keep rolling. So that's my final assessment. It's a bit of an incomplete because we don't know how Chris Ash is going to be, but I think at the bare minimum, the moves he's made is going to allow them to at least be on the same plane. And as we saw last year, this was a really well coached football team. And so maybe the defense takes a small step back, but then the offense will take at least a small step forward, and that balances. And if you don't have injury issues, your special teams should be better. And that's the only thing that made the special teams a problem last year was injuries to your kicker. Not a lot you can do about that. Well, what did they do? Except, here's a thought. If you lose your starter, have a pretty darn good kid there ready to replace him, which they did by bringing in Noah Burnett as the anticipated starter, but then bringing in also the freshman Eric Schmidt to say if for some reason Noah Burnett's not doing a good job or gets hurt, we're putting in basically a 5-star version of a kicker and Eric Schmidt. So that they did address that, Trev. It was addressed, and so I think the special teams I also expect to be a little bit better this year as well. So I feel a lot better about where the coaching staff is now than I did going into this offseason because I knew we were going to lose Al Golden. I knew Notre Dame was going to lose Al Golden. I had a feeling that they were going to lose at least one. Either Mickens or McCullough were going to be coveted. I thought maybe one would leave. I was worried you'd lose both of them. And they only lost one of them, and then the replacement was a great hire. And then that's it so far. So I think it's been a much better offseason from a coaching standpoint than I anticipate. So that's a good thing.
For me, when I look at this, I think at the minimum, they'll be the same for a multitude of different reasons. One, for all the reasons that you listed. And then two, for me, I look at the personnel that's coming back from a player standpoint. And what gives me a lot of hope in Notre Dame's defense moving forward is you return a lot of experience on defense. There's holes that you have to fill. Xavier Watts, Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Jordan Clark at the nickel. I understand that, but a lot of those positions outside of interior defensive tackle have been really addressed, and even interior defensive line has been addressed to a degree. That's just one of the bigger question marks we have on defense. But I look through and when Marcus Freeman had to go through and hire some of these coaches, a lot of it was, hey, for 2025, we're kind of asking you to steer the ship here. We're not asking you to rebuild the boat. And that's what gives me a lot of faith here. I love the Jawan Siders hire. I do. But he is also similar to Chris Ash coming into a very, very winning situation. Doesn't have to go out and find a new starting running back. You have Love and Price and Aeneas and Kedron and, and then on defense, you don't have to go through and rebuild an entire defense, which is something in Chris Ash's career he hasn't done a good job of when he's had to rebuild a defense. But when you give him the tools, it's been halfway decent. So
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that gives me a little bit of faith. And some of the off-field ones, we're going to have to wait and see. But for 2025, I'm going to say I think it's going to be at least the same. Now, 26 and moving forward, that's where my question mark comes in because you are going to be losing a good amount off of this 25 football team. So that's when I don't really know. But for this upcoming season, I feel pretty good about where they're going to be at. Now, last thing, I know you already talked about it. The changes that we're waiting on. I know you mentioned recruiting coordinator, a couple analysts. Anything else outside of those?
No, I mean, unless there's some move that now there could be some new positions created to work under the GM. That's maybe something that could be a factor. I mean, there's some things like that, but a couple analyst positions and then a recruiting coordinator is really all that's left. And those are big ones, and we'll address those as we get there. But I don't think that those. Look, Mark. The one thing I have zero concern with is Marcus Freeman going to hire someone that can do a good job recruiting? Because that's something he has a giant passion for and understands is super important. You just look at the moves he made when he was at Cincinnati as a D coordinator, bringing in Chad, having Chad focus on defensive recruiting, and then bringing Chad here. He gets that. I have no doubt that he understands how important that is and is going to make a big hire. So I'm honestly not concerned about that. It's just we don't know who in this case.
Well, that's going to do it for part one of the show today, guys. But don't go anywhere. We have a big segment coming up, literally and figuratively. We're going to be talking about Notre Dame's offensive line, which will be a huge foundation piece for this team in 25. But before we get there, folks, Please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Whichever platform you watch us on, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review, whether that's on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. And the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, it is time to dive into the offensive line. And it is an area of hot topics for a multitude of different reasons. A lot of good, a lot of improvement, a lot of discussion around this offensive line unit. And where we're going to start is we're going to talk about 2024 as a whole. Magical season for Notre Dame. Before the show started, I went through and I've been going back through and just watching Notre Dame's games from 2024. And when you can sit back and watch the entire highlight reel of all 16 games, call it 15 because I don't really feel like watching the Northern Illinois game. But when you go back through and you think about this season, it was a magical season. And the offensive line did play a part in Notre Dame making it to the national championship. But when you go through and we have an honest recap, there are some good takeaways and some not so good takeaways from this line, things that need to continue into the 25 season, and some things that I'm pretty sure we would be pretty content with if they got left behind in 2024. So let's go through and let's start talking about our honest recap of 2024, Bryan. Offensive line, it's the foundation of where you start. What are some of the good takeaways from this past season?
Look, here's the deal with the offensive line is it begins with understanding why it's important. And it's not just because Marcus Freeman said they're a line-driven program. That's Marcus Freeman stating the obvious if you're the head coach of Notre Dame. I mean, that should be a given for you. And if you don't understand that, you shouldn't be the head coach of Notre Dame. He understands that. But now it's about, okay, can you carry it out in a way that allows your program to dominate or at least be in the elite of the elite most seasons? Every position group is going to have those years where, hey, look, we had a great year. We had 2 guys leave earlier than we thought because we were so good last year. Yeah, we're going to take a little bit of a step back this year. So now we're only a top 10 offensive line instead of a top 3 offensive line. That's okay. That's going to happen. But it's they need to be dominant. And this past season, we have to understand, okay, what were they this past season? Were they good? Were they bad? Were they in between? What were the reasons why? What are the things they struggled with? Are they correctable things? Are they things that were just kind of bad luck? Are they things that were part of you've got to do a better job as a football coach? And that's what we want to discuss, because it's not just about looking back for the sake of looking back. It's looking back to have a true understanding of who you are so you can then fix it and get better. Sometimes it's just, hey, what was the big issue we had last year? If you look at as a football coach, you look at it that way. Well, we had no experience. We had a bunch of guys who had never done it before. There's nothing I can do about that in the moment. But now, looking back, that was an issue for us last year. Looking at it, I'm putting myself in the coach's shoes. Well, now it's not an issue because 4 of those 5 guys we had last year are now coming back and they're starters, and you feel that's how experience only gets fixed with experience. There's no drill that I can do as a position coach to fix experience. There's no drill that I can do. We're not out there practicing in front of 100,000 screaming Aggie fans. Can't replicate that. You got to just experience it. And so they have that. So that can be corrected, or can't be corrected. That just happens with time. Other things you look at and say, hey, boy, this was an issue for us last season. We got to figure out a way to fix that. And so that's what the coaching staff needs to be doing this offseason. And then we're going to evaluate those things on our side and then discuss, okay, can these things be fixed? And do we understand why those things happened? Because if there's some things that were coaching issues, then that needs to be addressed, looking at it again and saying, okay, this has been a problem now for 2 years. This is going to really have to get addressed and has to be a focal point this offseason. For example, we talked a lot last offseason, Trev, about how the issues with the offensive line in the run game were a lot of times the reason they struggled against better teams is because they would do a lot of catching. Catching on the offensive line means you just step and you embrace contact. You accept contact. You catch the blow instead of delivering the blow. And that had created a lot of issues when they played teams that were somewhat on their level. And there was not a lot. They didn't drive their feet a lot. There was a lot of things that I didn't like about the way the offensive line played. Looking at this year's offensive line in 24, we saw improvement there. They drove their feet a lot better. They didn't catch nearly as much. They were more physical. They got more of a push off the line. That's an improvement. You struggled there last year. You clearly saw it as well. You embraced it. You accepted it. You said, we got to fix it, and you went out and fixed it. A lot of times with the same players, and you lost 2 high draft picks and still were able to improve in that area. It regressed a little bit in the first couple rounds of the playoffs. Second half against Penn State, they turned it back on. They started driving their feet a little bit better. They got the benefit of some personnel changes that were forced upon them. And lo and behold, boom, the offensive line looks better. And even though they didn't necessarily win the battle against Ohio State, they competed against Ohio State. It wasn't like Louisville 2023 where they just kind of got their butts kicked. So those are the things that you look at and say, hey, this is why you need to understand what wasn't perfect about your team, what wasn't a strength of your team, not so you can hammer say, see, this is why Joe Rudolph shouldn't be the online coach. No, it's about you got to understand this so you can understand what needs to happen to make next year's unit better. And that's the key. That's going to be the key.
And there's a lot of good takeaways to your point about what you need to do moving forward to continue ascending as an entire unit. I am still under the firm belief that Notre Dame is still O-line U. Now, there have been some lapses and there's been some areas of concern, more so than in the years like in the 2015s, 2017s, 2018, 2020. And I understand that. But there's been some more, I'll put it this way, Notre Dame's offensive line has been more inconsistent over the last couple of seasons than what we have seen from that stretch of 2015 to 2020, call it. So when you go through and you start looking at some of the good from this past season, the first thing, and I've heard you mention it in multiple other shows, I heard you talk about it all last season when I was on the other side of the table with Irish Breakdown, was this offensive line is significantly more tough. They were really, really tough in 2024 for a bunch of different reasons. Some of it was battling adversity, which is all true, but just their performance on the field was more tough last season than what it was before.
We're going to discuss sort of the good and the bad. That's what Trevor's setting us up here for, is some of the things we liked and some things got to be better. And there's no place you can start when you talk about the positives besides toughness, physical toughness and mental toughness. And I know there were some players that were not happy with how starting lineups were created, but they still stayed locked in and then stepped into opportunities and did what they needed to do. There were young players being thrust into roles that I don't know how you can be ready for. Say whatever you want about Anthony Knapp and the areas he needs to improve. And we had a lot to say about that during the season. That kid stepped in as a true freshman, replacing a top 5 NFL draft pick, and at no point ever looked overwhelmed by the moment. He got overwhelmed by certain players. There were times you could tell he was a freshman learning but he never had that deer in the headlights. Oh my God, I went from playing at a little high school in Georgia to playing in Kyle Field. Oh, what am I going to do? No, he went on that first game, and that was one of his better games, actually, was the one against Texas A&M. Anthony Knapp's struggles were related to size, experience, technical advancement, all things that are correctable. It was never a moment where I was like, this kid doesn't want this fight. That was never a question mark. There was never a moment where I felt like, as Pat Coogan's getting his butt kicked by Nazir Stackhouse, that I thought, Pat's not competing today. He didn't bring it today. No, he was fighting his tail off. Nazir Stackhouse was just a way better player than he was. At no point, as I'm watching Emil Wagner just get his butt whooped by Abdul Carter, am I thinking, does Emil even want to be here today? And we had those questions in 2023. Do they even want to be out there today? It was just, he's a young, inexperienced player getting his butt whooped by what may be the number one draft prospect, taking position, whatever out of it. This is a guy that, if people didn't overrate quarterbacks, might be the number one pick in the draft and still might be the number one pick in the draft. Yeah, you're going to have a lot of people had issues with Abdul Carter, but it's all correctable. It was never, I don't think Emil wants that smoke today. I don't think Emil's ready for this fight today. Emil fought, and in the second half, he had his fair share of moments as well in that game. And that's something you have to say. If they can build on that foundation, that gives me a lot of confidence that the offensive line next year can keep building on this. because we saw a level of fight and toughness from this line, even when they weren't playing well. And there was a lot of games they didn't play well, and that's something we're going to get to. The level of play, technically playing as one, that was a problem all year. But when you have some level of talent and you fight and you want the fight, you embrace the fight, you embrace the physicality, and you're a mentally tough young man, meaning when you get beat, you don't just start crying and getting in your feelings, and then that leads to another mistake, which leads to another mistake. When you have physical toughness and mental toughness and you battle and you're more talented than the guy across from you, you're going to win most of those battles. There's a lot of times this year where the offensive line played well from a results standpoint, but if you're doing it from a teaching tape standpoint, you're like, that wasn't good. Like there was a play against Navy where they literally turned a guy loose and they still ran for a long touchdown because they played hard. And those are things that say those things can get corrected as long as they can continue with what we saw this year, which is when those kids were out there, they battled their butts off. They played hard and they showed mental toughness. That's a great foundation to run on, to build on. And look, the run game results, Trev, were a byproduct of you having elite running backs that could turn a 15-yard gain for 130 other offensive lines into a 60-yard touchdown. Let's not kid ourselves and act like some of the production wasn't due to the fact that you had elite running backs who could just make people miss at an exceptionally high rate. But you're also not doing that in spite of the offensive line usually either. You know, and that's what we said is all year. It's like, just get a body on a body. Well, they did that enough. So there was a lot of good things in the run game where that fight, that toughness, then is a reason why they went out and averaged 200 yards a game. We'll talk about the counter to that here in a second. But I think they showed that they can do damage in the run game, even against good teams, because of that toughness, that fight, and all those type of things, which is why Notre Dame which is a part of the reason why Notre Dame averaged over 200 yards a game. Having Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Riley Leonard played an even bigger role. Let's be honest about that. But they're not, it's not like they did it in spite of that line all the time. But there were times when, you know, you get a 70-yard touchdown run against Purdue when you didn't block like a guy comes through untouched, unblocked, Jadarian Price makes a miss and runs for a 70-yard touchdown. That's not on the line. That's on Jadarian Price. You know, where you leave a guy unblocked, but Jeremiah Love makes a miss and then outruns the defense. Yeah, you did your job to a degree, but that's because that dude in the backfield is special. There's times Riley Leonard did that, you know, and that's part of it as well. I mean, how many sacks, lost yardage did Riley Leonard avoid this year that would have otherwise happened to a normal quarterback? Right. So there's some of that. But the thing I'll still sit back and say, Trev, is they battled their butts off. And I also think the current makeup of the offensive line, part of the reason that they were able to fight harder is because I think the skill sets are more suited to what Mike Denbrock likes to do schematically than maybe what they did the year before, with less pin and pull, more just come off and play hard. And I think that fit as well.
I mean, we're talking about a group here that before the season even started, they lost their slated starting left tackle. Along the way, they lost their starting center for the season. They lost their right guard in Billy Schrouth at the time for a handful of games. I mean, close to a month, if not over. They started a redshirt freshman and a true freshman next to each other. Believe me, we're going to also have some comments about that here in just a second. But to your point about battling mental and physical toughness, for this group to still be a Joe Moore Award semifinalist is noteworthy. For them to still be a factor in Notre Dame playing in a national championship game and in the semifinals had their starting left tackle and starting right guard both sidelined before halftime. For them to be able to go in and do what they did, it's exceptional when you look at it through that lens. It really is. And then to your point, the scheme with Mike Denbrock, the adjustments that he had to make with this offensive line, and how the offensive line rolled with the adjustments is definitely something where you just have to tip your cap at the end of the day. It is. Now, looking at this from the other side of the coin, there are some things, however, like I mentioned, if some of these things can stay in 2024, wouldn't be all that upset about it either. And the first and the biggest one I know we're going to dive into is the pass protection. The pass protection in 2024 was not where it needed to be. That's for sure.
Yeah, there's if we're having an honest conversation about the offensive line, we have to be willing to say that while they did some really good things, there were some things they did that were very problematic. That if you didn't have Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Riley Leonard, it would have created a lot more problems. And we're going to discuss those. And like you said, it begins with pass pro. And there's a lot of things that go into it. The tackle technique is a problem. In the 2 years under Joe Rudolph, there's only been one tackle that hasn't had relatively consistent slide issues in pass pro, and that's Joe Alt, who was coached by his dad and Harry Heastand for longer than some of these other guys were. When you've got a Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Famer offensive tackle coaching you as a kid, you're not going to need a whole lot of schooling when you get to college. You know what I'm saying? And that's been an issue. Whether it's overstepping, understepping, just playing with proper angles, it's just been a consistent problem in the last 2 years. Blake Fisher had the problem last season, 2023. We saw that Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner had it this year. There was times where Emil Wagner would get beat around the edge, and you're just like, an athlete like Emil Wagner should never get beat on a speed rush like that. It's a pure technical problem. And, well, he's young. That's fine. You use whatever excuse you want. It's still what happened. And it was something that we also saw from Blake Fisher the year before, right tackle. And yes, youth is an issue, but that needs to be addressed. You don't just assume that everything's going to get fixed just because your guys are older, because there were technical issues that we saw. I also think in general, Trev, and I didn't write this down on the list I gave to you, but part of that is I think the hand play needs to get a lot better at Notre Dame. I don't think Joe Rudolph's offensive lines have used their hands the way they need to. And a couple ways. One is using them as weapons in the run game, I think, is important. They're face first a lot. Their hands just kind of then get placed. Their hands don't strike with their hands the way that they need to. I think that needs to get fixed. I think they need to have more force with their hands, and that plays a role in pass pro. And that's why when they get, a lot of times you see them get beat because they don't win. Their hands get outside a lot. That's why they get called for a lot of holdings, because the offensive linemen get their hands outside a lot. That's a hand problem. I think that the fact that they don't get the kind of strike they have allows guys to get to an edge more, which then also results in more holding as opposed to striking and kind of being the aggressor a little bit more. I think teams with really good counter moves have given them some problems because they don't think they use their hands correctly. The footwork in pass pro has been an issue because that's why they struggle so much with some of the line games. At times, the line games that beat them were a result of you didn't have great athletes at guard, especially right guard. Rocco Spindler did a lot of good things at Notre Dame. He's not a twitchy guy with great change of direction skills. But there's a lot of times where it wasn't about that. It's just they had no concept that there was even a twist happening. And at center, guard, or tackle, that happened way too much, way too frequently. And when teams like Indiana could just say, we're just going to run stunts at you the whole second half, and you're not going to do a dang thing about it, that should never happen for a team like Notre Dame. I'm just going to be honest. Some of the past offensive lines, whether it's under Coach Heastand or Coach Warner, or years past under Joe Moore, you try doing that stuff in the second half, they're gonna eventually figure it out and gash you with some big runs. And that didn't happen to them. They could just say, well, you're toast because we're gonna do this and there's nothing you can do about it. Some of that's personnel, but a lot of that had to do with there was a lack of preparation to handle certain things, Trevor. And we talked about it all year, how line games just killed this offensive line. And even on like quick game, which is so inexcusable. Just the nature of slide protection in quick game should handle any type of stunts and twists and stunts. And the things that teams are doing were relatively basic. And so that all of that stuff goes together, Trevor, where a lot of it was a result of pass pro, but the hand thing also bled into the run game. The not always handling movement factored into the run game, which is why Notre Dame had an abnormally high volume of tackles for loss. I see a lot of people that there's this weird thing going around with Notre Dame circles, and I don't know where it originated, where there's just this group of people that just love to kind of bang on Jadarian Price. well, he averaged, he had these 5 long runs, but then the rest of his carries, average X number of yards per carry. Like, that's pure spin if you're going to turn that into sort of some Jadarian Price problem. Like, I'm watching the Stanford game the other day, and there was an early run where Jadarian's running, I don't know, I think it was like an outside zone play. He takes 2 steps with the ball and gets drilled by an unblocked defensive lineman. Like, how was that on Jadarian Price? Now, if you study the calls that he had compared to the calls Jeremiah Love had, Jeremiah Love was predominantly an inside zone guy. You're going to have less run-throughs on that. Jadarian would have more counters. Not always. I mean, Jeremiah ran everything. Jadarian ran everything. But good coaches know that Jadarian is a little better with some of this stuff. Jeremiah is a little better with some of this stuff. And it just so happened that some of those things, like the counters and some of the pin and pulls and the outside zones, are areas where they would run a lot of that with Jadarian, and they would have run-throughs. And there was a ton of, there was a play in the Penn State game where Jadarian had a 5-yard loss because the guard, Charles Jagasaw, went the wrong way. Now, he blew someone up, but he went the wrong way and allowed a D tackle to come right through the hole. And as soon as Jadarian Price gets the ball, he's getting tackled. Is that a Jadarian Price thing? No, it's not. It's an offensive line problem. And that happened way too much this year where guys would just come through unblocked. That has to get fixed. Now, there was other times where Jadarian was running a play or Jeremiah was running a play or where Riley was running a play where they'd make a guy like that miss. And so then somebody in the chest seemed to always want to bounce the play outside because that's the stuff he was running. He wasn't bouncing a bunch of inside zones outside. They were running stuff to allow him to play to that. They'd run duo. They'd run outside zone. Notre Dame's outside zone is more of an off tackle play that allows for bounce. That's what he's good at. So they called it for that. And so that's why he did those things. Everybody thinks that they just ran the exact same plays all the time, the exact same amount. That's not how it worked because they're not dumb coaches. And I'm not saying the same thing towards you, Matt. I'm just saying they were smart and coached to their strengths. But the reality is there was way too many times this year, Trev, where you'd see my run game breakdowns where they put up all these really good yards. And I'd say that's great because of the big playability, but their efficiency was near 50%. Or there was one game, I have to go find the breakdown. It was earlier in the year where they had over about 200 some yards rushing, and their efficiency rate, I think, was below 50% because they just had some big gash runs. That's terrible. You want to be minimum 60 is when you're really rolling, but you always want to be mid 50s or higher to say you had a good performance. And they were consistently under, but the numbers would look good because they'd have, think about it this year. You had Jadarian Price or Jeremiah Love had touchdown runs of 98 yards. He had one of 76, I believe. I'm pulling up his game log now. Yes, he had touchdown runs of 98, 76, 68, 64, 48, 39, 34, 29 yards, and he had a touchdown reception of 32 yards. That's big-time playmaking ability. And then you look at Jadarian Price this year. That's enough from just any offense. But then you add in the fact that Jadarian also had touchdown runs of 47, 70, 65, 36 this season. And then we still have Riley Leonard, who this year had at least one 50-yard touchdown run against Miami of Ohio. Let me find that one out here. Yes, he had a 50-yard touchdown run against Miami of Ohio. He had a 34-yard run against Purdue. He had a 34-yard touchdown run against Florida State. He had a 24-yard run against USC. And this is a guy that was also a big play weapon for Notre Dame, and that allowed them to still get their numbers despite being a very inefficient running team. That's got to get better next year. The efficiency level has to improve. And that's partly why they weren't good on third down, because they had a lot of circumstances where they were in third and longs because they'd get themselves in these bad spots with either a run-through, tackle for loss, or a sack, or there was too many times this year, especially early in the year, Trev, where Riley Leonard would make some big play, first drive against Stanford, guy gets beat, Riley makes somebody miss, he takes off running for a big gain, you're now near the red zone, it's coming back because of just an unnecessary hold. You think of what was the game where A&M, where Jadarian has that long 37-yard run, comes back because of just a holding penalty. That just was, why? You didn't need to do that. Like, I don't understand what you were doing there. Those type of things happen way too much. Those things have to get fixed. And you can give me all the stats and all the things you want. Look at their look at their rushing yard average in the postseason. That's what tells you how good of a rushing team you truly are. And the reality is they weren't a very good running team in the postseason, Trev. They weren't. They weren't nearly the team in the postseason that they were in the regular season. And that's going to have to change. 193 against Indiana. 98 of that came on one run. 154 against Georgia. Some of that was on quarterback runs, but, it's fine. But then in the semifinals, you combined for 170 yards in 2 games against Penn State and Ohio State. You averaged 2.8 and 2.0 yards per carry. In your last 3 games of the playoffs, you averaged 4.2, 2.8, 2.0 yards per rush attempt. That's what matters. Louisville, who was arguably the best team you played in the regular season, you rushed for 117 yards and 3.8 yards per carry. In the game you lost against Northern Illinois, you ran for 123 yards and 4.4 yards per carry. That's what I define you by, not what you did to Army and what you did to Miami of Ohio or what you did to Stanford, who stinks, or Georgia Tech, who they were solid against, but they still had their fair share of issues in that game. I don't care what you did against 2-10 Florida State, 6-6 USC. I care about what you did against Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, Louisville, Texas A&M, and Northern Illinois. And outside of the Texas A&M game, they didn't run the ball very well against the better teams they played this year. They didn't. And that's going to have to change big time. And it's a lot of reasons are understandable. Young, inexperienced, injuries, all those things are understandable, and they can get corrected. But you can't ignore the technical and teaching issues that also factored into this, that you can't blame on inexperience, because those things still continued when Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler, who were not inexperienced, were put into the lineup. Those things still continued. Not as much, but they still continued. And those things have to get addressed before you move on to what this football team is going to be in 2025, because if those things don't get addressed, this team's going to put up huge numbers in the regular season. But they're going to, a couple games against some really good teams, they're not going to run as well as they should. And when they get back to the postseason, we're going to see the same problem when they play the better teams, if those things don't get fixed. And that's going to be a big, big, big part of how we evaluate Joe Rudolph going from year 2 to year 3. The encouraging thing is he showed growth from year 1 to year 2, no doubt, in the run game. But now you need to show even more in year 3. And that's the task in front of him when you talk about, some of the things that led to the success this season, but then the things that kept him from being as good as they should have been.
Pass pro is going to be a huge area of interest for me this upcoming season, because you're not going to have a Riley Leonard back there that has the escapability that he had. You're not going to have, stiffs in the backfield. Angeli, Minchie, Carr, they're all athletic. They're not Riley Leonard with the legs. They aren't. Notre Dame's going to have to be a more dynamic passing offense, something that we've covered this season, this postseason, or this offseason, excuse me. And the offensive line is going to be a huge area for that to succeed. To your point about the run game, I think there's this idea that Notre Dame's running backs, because they are home run hitters, there's this idea that they are feast or famine backs. And there's this idea that they're either going to get 2 yards or 80, and where Notre Dame needs to become more efficient. Efficiency is a huge word that I've been using all offseason, and I use it a lot during the season. The offensive line is a big reason for some of the inefficiencies in the run game. J.D. Price and Love, Riley Leonard from time to time might not have always seen the correct hole to run through. There were some issues there. But Jeremiah Love showcased that he can be a grinded out, let's just get 5-6 yards at a time. It's not – there's a lot of people that I think still believe that Jeremiah Love is still somewhat of a version of George Atkinson, of he's going to get you 2 or 75. It's interesting. It's like, hey, listen, Jeremiah Love has shown the ability to go through and be a 3-down type of back. Now, he doesn't have to because of the depth of the room, but the in-between has to be there.
I could get that about Jadarian Price, because I do think at times Jadarian does go big game hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to, I mean, I'll sit there and say this notion that Jadarian Price is just like either a home run or that's not accurate at all. But I do think if you're having a more rational discussion of Jadarian Price, you can say there are times he does that, but then there's a lot of times where it's like, I don't know what he's supposed to do about that. But he does go big game hunting at times because I think he knows I got 5 carries in this game, and I'm going to have to make the most of them. And so I think there are times when we see that from him, and when he's at his best is when he's just staying within the system, which when Georgia Tech he was that way, Stanford he was that way, and some of those games where he had more efficiency as a runner. But to say that about Jeremiah Love would makes no sense to me. That's a little nuts to me that somebody would have that sense about him. Yeah,
it was shocking. It was. Now, one of the last things here before we transition into what this team could look like in 2025, there were some interesting personnel decisions that were made in 2024 as well that I know that we wanted to touch on before we transition.
Yeah, that's my biggest question mark, and we're going to dive into it more specifically in when we do the 2025 breakdown, Trev. But for the second year in a row, I have major question marks about Joe Rudolph's decision-making on who he starts and where he plays guys. The year before it was you went all offseason with Billy Schrouth as your starting left guard. And then just like that with no explanation, no communication. This is what I keep being told over and over and over again. And some people don't want to believe it. And they want to say, oh, it's just guys who left, who got beat out, aren't happy, blah. Well, yeah, this is kind of coming from also, let's not forget these guys that got beat out, even if that were my sources, it's not. These guys were the ones that beat out other people the year before. And I still heard those same things. So you make the move of you sit Billy Schrouth and you put in Pat Coogan. I didn't love that decision, to be completely honest with you. Then you come into this year and you bench Coogan and Spindler, and you put Sam Pendleton in left guard. Billy Schrouth, you move to right guard. And that I didn't understand. The way they went about it, where Billy starts at center, and then he moves them to Sam Pendleton starts at center, struggles. They move him to left guard, and he's just playing left guard, where every day Rocco and Pat are cross-training at different spots. Rocco would go from left guard to right guard. Pat would go from center to right guard to left guard, all those type of things. And there was no continuity from these guys. And then, lo and behold, guess what? Sam Pendleton's going to grade out higher because he's playing the same position day after day after day. Well, the other problem with that decision was the minute you lost Charles Jagasaw to an injury, your first reaction, the minute you thought that was true and you were going to move Sam Pendleton left guard to let him compete, the minute that happened, you should have swapped Schrouth and Pendleton. The decision to go into the season with a true freshman and a redshirt freshman as your blindside blockers for your quarterback was an absolutely horrible decision from Joe Rudolph. It just was. Not even that any of those guys played. You've got to have some sense to say, I know your plan was to have Billy on the right side with Emil. That's fine. But the minute you lost Jagasaw and realized that you weren't going to just definitely lock in Rocco Spindler or Pat Coogan at the left guard spot, and again, I still don't understand why you put Rocco at right guard or left guard when he started at right guard the year before, and Billy the spring before was a left guard. A lot of that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Rocco's a returning starter at right guard. Leave him there, put Billy at left guard, and let somebody challenge Rocco at right guard. But fine, you do whatever it is you decided to do. Why then do you not change it back the minute you lose Charles Jagasaw and you know you're going to start a true freshman there, and then you're going to have a redshirt freshman there playing left guard? Should have changed it. It made no sense to me. And then lo and behold, when they had issues early in the season, where did it come from? The left side of the offensive line. Anthony Knapp would have benefited greatly from having a veteran next to him to start the season. He would have benefited greatly. Instead, he had a guy that was just as green as he was in Sam Pendleton. That wasn't fair to either player. And then Sam could have benefited from being in between Ashton Craig and Emil Wagner. Now, Emil's a first-time starter, but he's still a junior. And then Ashton Craig was a returning starter. And then when Ashton got hurt, you'd have put a senior who started even more than Ashton Craig in there. That would have benefited Sam a ton. But instead, you put Sam next to a true freshman who was in no way going to be able to help Sam out the way that a veteran could. And then Sam had Sam couldn't help out Anthony. Anthony couldn't help out Sam. And then that's where we saw a lot of issues early in the season with the run game and especially in pass pro. And that was a coaching decision. You didn't have to do that. Jagasol got hurt in the first week of fall camp. This isn't something that happened right before the season started and you were kind of forced to just roll with it. This happened so early that you could have absolutely had time to make a change. And the fact that he didn't see that and think about that a year after, for whatever reason, he decided to start Pat Coogan over Billy Schrauth. And then lo and behold, what happens when Rocco and Zeke Correll get hurt and Billy Schrauth is thrust into the lineup? All of a sudden, and Ashton Craig's thrust in the line. All of a sudden, the run game last 3 weeks, they averaged over 250 yards a game. Just like that. Same thing happened this year. When did the offensive line really start to take off? When you had after the injuries and you put the veterans in there. And then the final one was when you put Billy Schrauth back in at left guard and you left Rocco at right guard after Billy came back from an injury. Why did you need that to happen before you realized that's what you should have done day one? Both years, the success on the offensive line came at its best after injuries forced the proper players into the proper positions. That's a problem. That's a major problem that has to get fixed, especially when you're looking at it now saying, look, you got Charles Jagasol and Anthony Knapp. You can't put both of them at left tackle. They both need to be on the field competing for a spot, and it can't be for the same spot. You know, you've had Sullivan Absher. You've been jerking him around from position to position his whole career through 2 years. You got to figure out a place to put him and play him. And that's my thing that gives me a little bit of pause moving forward. We'll dive into it in the next segment. But looking back at the history of it, that's concerning for me that we have now had 2 years in a row where very egregious decisions are made. And then you say, well, you're just fans. Okay, fine. But just look at the numbers after the injuries forced them to go with what we thought they should have gone with in the first place. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence at all that happened. I mean, look, in the, the 6-7 games before Billy Schrauth got reinserted to the lineup with Rocco, they went for 198, 123, 362, 270, 117, 229, 168. And what was the thing that they were relying on a lot the first 6 games of the year? You were relying a lot on your quarterback running during that stretch. Then Billy gets put into the lineup, and you leave Rocco at right guard, and this is what you did the rest of the regular season. 265, 201, 234, 273, 258. That's not a coincidence. And I had somebody say to me, well, you know, look at what happened. They finished the season really well with the offensive line once they put Jagasol on the field. And I said, Jagasol doesn't play a meaningful down in the playoffs if Rocco doesn't get hurt and if Anthony Knapp doesn't get hurt. If those two guys don't get hurt, we don't see a down from Charles Jagasol in the postseason. How do I know that? Because he didn't play a down prior to those guys getting hurt. It's not like they rotated him in against Georgia or against Indiana. You could say, well, you know, you couldn't. He wasn't cleared yet. That's fine. Okay. But he was playing PAT field goal. So he was clearly cleared to play. And then he looked pretty good against Penn State. Like, how did that decision especially since Rocco got hurt in the first round, he was clearly not 100%. At no point in time in the Georgia game, you thought we might need to give number 56 a shot because 50's battling, but he can't move. That's what we saw in the game against Penn State. He couldn't move. He couldn't plant off that right foot at all. It took him going down again in the second quarter before you realize, okay, now you have to put somebody in because he's hurt. And Jagasol then lit it up. You know, and Anthony Knapp goes down. You put in Tosh Baker. And all second half of the game, they ran all over Penn State. Now, part of that was halftime adjustments, but part of that was like you finally were forced to put the kind of line in there you should have had in there.
And some of the halftime adjustments that they made, they were able to do because of the healthier personnel that was in there. It is no mystery that, and again, hats off to Rocco Spindler, but it's no mystery to me that the first 2 plays that they run plays out of the second half were pin and pull, because now you had an interior offensive lineman that was healthy enough to move.
And fresh.
And fresh. So to your point about the personnel changes not making any sense, that's what gives me a lot of hope and a lot of pause for when we do talk about 2025, because we've seen what happens when Joe Rudolph kind of has a buffet of talent in front of him. It sounds like it's kind of just, all right, well, we're going to try you here for this practice and try you here for this play and try you here for this play, and then we're just going to kind of see what happens. And then I'm going to put together a starting lineup that had none of that. So it's just, there's a lot of room for excitement moving forward, but that's one of the things in 2024 that you hope Joe Rudolph, now especially being in Mike Denbrock's offensive coaching staff, can kind of sit back and look at and say, okay, hindsight's always 2020. Probably should have made this move before, and we're going to see what that looks like moving forward. I couldn't agree with you more. Could not agree with you more.
So that'll go ahead and wrap up, transition us into the next segment, Trev.
Yeah, you got
Covered
it.
that one pretty good.
Well, that's going to do it for the 2024 recap of the offensive line performance, the things that we like, the things that are hopefully left in 2024. But don't go anywhere. We still have 2025 to preview, and it's a really, really exciting conversation, especially with this unit. And we will have a mailbag following that section. So I've seen people already getting their questions, their comments in the chat. Please continue to do so. We're going to address those. But before we get there, hit that like button, that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast. And as always, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, the 2025 offensive line. And this is a really fun conversation to have because the expectations are going to be raised mostly because of a lot of what you have coming back. And it's a really awesome, really fun conversation to start having when you start diving into it. But we believe that the 2025 Notre Dame offensive line should be elite. And when you start having that conversation, you start diving a little bit into the why. Why do we believe that this unit has the opportunity to be elite?
Yeah. Well, the run, I mean, there's so many reasons why you're excited about it, Trev, and why you expect it to be good. And you look at last year's run game and in the last segment, we talked about this issue and that issue. But at the beginning, we talked about talented and physical and, all that, but the talent in the backfield's elite. And you're talking about a team that had their top three running backs average 6.9, 6.2, and 6.4 yards per carry. And oh, by the way, that other freshman you brought in, when you brought him in running behind the backup offensive line, averaged 5.5 yards per carry. You know what I mean? And Kedron Young, I mean, your running backs went over 6 yards a carry this season as a group. That's really impressive. But it's also, I mean, you saw enough from the offensive line to say, boy, if you can address some of the things we talked about, get the right people on the field before the injuries force you to put the right people on the field. Just make the same growth in the pass pro and in certain technical areas the way you did in certain areas with the physicality and footwork and leg drive and things like that were much better in year two compared to year one. That's coaching. The players didn't figure it out. This wasn't like 2020 when, I told people, like, you want to know why the offensive line played so much better? It's because a bunch of those guys spent the offseason hanging out with Harry Hiestand. True story. And Chris Watt obviously was a GA on that team and spent a lot of time with Harry Hiestand and helped him out. That was the reason for it. The quote unquote blame or responsibility or whatever for the improvement this past season was because Joe Rudolph focused on those things, worked on those things, repped those things every day, and the play got better. That's good coaching. Now you need to apply that to the other areas. And if you do that, the thing you look at, Trev, and you're like, God, this offensive line is loaded. Let me ask you this question. If the offensive line going into fall camp, going into the season, was going to be left to right, Anthony Knapp, Sullivan Absher at left guard, Joe Otting at center, Chris Tarrick at right guard, and Gerby Lambert at right tackle, I'm not upset about that. That's a huge offensive line, a talented offensive line, and where you're not that big, center and left tackle, you're very athletic. That could be your number 2 offensive line this year. Like that's talent. you look at what the line may look like this year, whether it's Emil or Gerby or Anthony or Jagasaw or Tarek or Absher or Shrouth or Craig there's so much talent. Oh, and by the way, they're adding another 5-star freshman to the lineup this next year with Will Black coming in. There's so much talent, and Coach Easton started it, and Coach Rudolph has built on it. But it's and not only built on it with some recent classes, but even looking forward. We talked about this when we broke down the 2026 offensive line class. They're clearly trying to get bigger, and you're going to start to see the fruits of that more so this season. But they're not so obsessed with bigger that they pass on a guy like Anthony Knapp, who may not be bigger, but he's strong for, not just strong for size, but just strong, period. And he's very athletic. So if the right guy's there, they'll take a smaller guy, but he better have some traits that you like. And Anthony certainly had that, which is why he had a lower grade coming out of high school for me, 3.5 star, but had 4.5 star upside. Because you're like, if the weight comes and he can keep the athleticism that he has at 270 when he's 295, this guy could be a dude. And we saw that to some degree last season. So when you look at it and you think of the talent they have coming back, it's hard not to get excited. And we saw a lot. This isn't even just any more like fictitious based on high school talent. We saw in games what Emil Wagner can do when he was on his game. We saw what Jagasaw can do, what Knapp can do, what Billy can do, what Ashton Craig can do. But we even got a chance to see a little bit of what these younger guys could do. I mean, they put the backup offensive line in the game with Gerby and Chris Tarek and Sylvan Absher and Joe Otting, and they would run right down the field and put the ball in the end zone. I mean,
yeah,
it was just like, and the other teams, and against Purdue, that was still Purdue's first team defense. They never put their backup defense on the field. And you're just like, dude, there's so much talent here. And now that there's also experience to go with that talent, there's great depth. It's hard not to get excited about what this offensive line can be when you think about size, talent, depth, and now even more experience. And why this matters is, look, you're going to need this offensive line to be better than it was a year ago. Number one, because you didn't win a championship and your offensive line struggled in your last 2 games, right? I mean, that's just the standard. The standards. You're Notre Dame. You ran for 53 yards in the college football playoffs, and a big chunk of that came on the first drive, and you could never replicate that again. You had your own mistakes. We talked about I did a breakdown of 2 run plays that would have gone for big plays. One got called back because of a false start by a receiver. The next one on a play that was 2nd and 25 might have gone for 40, 50 yards if the guard properly pulls. And Jadarian was waiting on him to pull too. Like you could see it. Jadarian was like, pop it, pop it, pop it. And then he didn't pop it. And then Jadarian was forced to pop it. And with no lead blocker, and then he gets tackled for no gain. And you're like, yeah, Jadarian Price is no, that's on the freaking right guard. You could see Jadarian waiting on him, slowing down to let him get outside, and he didn't properly do it. You didn't play well enough in those moments, and that's not acceptable. And that's the standard at Notre Dame. And so you've got to get better there. When you look at it from the standpoint of you're going to have a first-time quarterback, really. And I know Steve started a game, but I don't care. Starting the Sun Bowl in El Paso, Texas, against an Oregon State team who half their starters aren't even playing in the game, and they were just a solid team anyway, does not say, okay, he's ready to go lead you to victory over Georgia or Bama. Point being, not a shot at Steve, but like that experience does not prepare him for what will come as the full-time starter, because we all knew who the starter was going to be. He wasn't that. There was no pressure on Steve in the bowl game. They already had their starting quarterback. His name was Sam Hartman. He'd already signed with Notre Dame. You know what I mean? Excuse me, Riley Leonard. He'd already committed to Notre Dame. You knew who the starting quarterback was going to be the next year, and it wasn't going to be Steve. If Steve wins a job now, I don't care that he started against Oregon State. It matters what he does moving forward. And he's going to be a new starter with a completely different level of pressure on his shoulders than he had going into the Sun Bowl or coming off the bench with no time to think against Penn State, which was huge. He did great in those moments, but it's just different when you're the guy every single day. There's a different type of pressure when it's just all the eyes are always on you. If it's not him, it's Kenny Minchie or CJ Carr, who played a grand total of 4 snaps last season and threw a combined 1 pass last season. You're going to need your offensive line to carry them early. That's the other part of it. So to be a championship team, you've got to do this and play to this level, but you also got to do it to protect your younger guys. That's a big part of it as well. And if there is a chance your defense takes a step back, your offense can't pick up the slack if your offensive line doesn't play better next year than it did last year. And in my opinion, significantly so. Like very noticeable year 1 to year 2 improvement. And I think they did that last year. I think they played significantly better from year 1 to year 2, in my view, especially considering you didn't have Joe Alt and Blake Fisher to work with anymore. And then you go into year 3, I need to see another significant jump in year 3. And then hopefully it starts to kind of plateau, but it plateaus at excellence. They're not there yet. And that's what gets me excited. But it's not just that I'm excited about it, Trevor. It needs to happen if this team is going to reach its full potential. It has to happen.
We talked all season about Notre Dame being a rhythm-based offense and how it's inconsistent, and a lot of that begins with the offensive line. I mean, there would be games where, even just the first half looked polar opposite from the second half, whether that started out well and ended poorly or started poorly and ended well. But you just go through and you look at the talent that they have bringing back. They have 5 offensive linemen who have starting experience in meaningful games that come back, between Emil Wagner, Anthony Knapp, Charles Jagasaw, Ashton Craig, barring that he's healthy enough to be playing meaningful minutes, potentially in the spring or into the summer and the fall. And then Billy Schrauth. You talk about a potential starting offensive line, even if Joe Rudolph went with the safe, hey, we're just going to go with the 5 guys that started. That's a pretty decent offensive line. That's a really good offensive line. But then you start thinking about what's been waiting in the wings and the players that didn't. They played some snaps last year, but I'm talking about meaningful snaps and in moments in games where it was still in doubt. And it's bigger. I think that's crazy to me. In moments last season, Notre Dame puts in their second string offensive line, and they got bigger. You'd
be 6'8", 320 at left tackle. They would have Absher often at left guard, who's 6'7", 320 something. Joe Wadding's 6'3", 295. Your right guard is 6'5", 330, and your right tackle 6'7", 325. That's your backup offensive line.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And you have those guys who've been waiting in the wings to start battling for spots. You have Sullivan Absher, who Notre Dame has listed at 6'7", 321 right now on their roster, battling it out for an interior guard position. You have Chris Tarrick, who's 6'5", 333. You have Gerby Lambert, who's 6'6", 323. Will Black is coming in. He's 6'7". He's probably going to be close to, if not over 300 pounds by the time fall camp starts. So, you go through and you look at what this team has coming back from a starting perspective and from a potential perspective. Not only do they have, to your point, the opportunity to be elite, they have to, because that's, one, the standard at Notre Dame, the standard that Marcus Freeman has for this program. But that was also the miss in 2024. They had moments where it's like, okay, this offensive line is really starting to put it together. But then sometimes even within the same game, you just kind of throw your hands up in the air and it's like, hey, what is going on here? But they're loaded. And when you have essentially 11 guys that you could trot out there that I wouldn't be upset that were in the starting lineup, it's got to be a pretty good feeling for that offensive coaching staff heading into the spring. It's got to be, man.
It does. It's like with anything we talk a lot about, Trevor. It's margin for error is so important in football. And especially with this era of 16 game seasons where you're having to go out there and you're just not going to be healthy for 16 games. It's impossible to be that healthy for 16 games. Somebody's going to not pan out. Somebody's going to get hurt. Those things happen to everybody. And if you're like counting on, if our starting 5 is healthy, we're going to be golden. But if we got to dip into our number 2s, we're in trouble. And that's been an issue for Notre Dame at most positions for a long time. And that's the position And I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and he was talking about that as well. And it's like, we haven't seen this kind of depth from Notre Dame in a long time, where you can lose a Benjamin Morrison and replace him with a Leonard Moore, where you can lose, a Charles Jagasaw and replace him with an Anthony Knapp, who's a talented player, or, lose Ashton Craig and replace him with a guy that started 13 games the year before, or lose a guy like you could lose Jordan Botelho and Boubacar and replace him with what? Josh Burnham and Junior Tuilamaka. And, it's like most teams can't do that. Most teams can't do that. Most teams don't even have those kind of guys in their starting lineup, much less coming off the bench. And so, but the depth is so important, Trevor. And also from the standpoint of the competition, why do I feel like Emil Wagner's going to make a big jump this offseason? Because I think he's a smart kid. I think he's a competitive kid, because he has to. Because if he doesn't, and you've got a good offensive line coach, and Emil just goes through the motions and thinks he's arrived and he's content being where he is, he's going to get beat out by a 6'7", 323-pound, former 5-star player in Gerby Lambert. How do I know that Anthony Knapp, when he gets back from health, is going to bust his tail? Because I think he knows if I don't, I'm not going to be starting. How do I know that Ashton Craig is going to be better when he gets back? Because, again, he's going to have someone there pushing him. And that's true across the board. And I think competition breeds excellence, but also competition weeds out the guys that don't really have that winner's mentality. And you're going to really find out, does Emil have that? Does Billy have that? Does Knapp have that? Does Jagasaw have that? Those are, and then also it's not just the starters. Does Sullivan Absher really have that dog in him to where he's going to look and say, I don't care that they're bringing back X number of starters. I want to play, and I'm going to go out there and work like a guy that wants to beat one of those what's out. And then you go into the next one and you say the same thing about Gerby. What kind of dog does he have inside of him? I don't care that Emil's coming back. I want that job. And say, I'm gonna play so well and work so hard that they're gonna have to figure out a way to get me on the field. That's what you want. And that goes with the first and second teamers. And that's what competition does. It weeds out some of the guys that really don't have that fight in them. And that's what excites me too. I mean, that's what's great. That's why, I mean, it's size, it's athleticism, it's numbers, it's talent. There's all these things that get you excited about what this offensive line can be, assuming they can make the improvements. But it all goes down to this, Trevor. Will Joe Rudolph allow this offensive line to reach its fullest potential? Not just from a coaching standpoint, but it's crazy that we have to have this conversation. But I think after the last 2 years, we have to have this conversation. Will he make the right decisions to get the best five on the field? And what does that look like? Does that automatically mean that he has to move Anthony Knapp away from left tackle? I'm not saying that. Does it mean he has to put Charles Jagasaw at left tackle? Does that mean he has to, bench Emil Wagner to put in a Gerby Lambert simply because he's more talented, physically talented? No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is you've got to decide, number one, what gives us the best chance to put our best five out there for whatever reason. And what does that mean for certain players? Does it mean I'm going to keep Anthony Knapp at left tackle and spring ball, let him compete with Charles, see who the best guy for that job is? Because I think that it's more important that you let one of those two win the left tackle job before you move them to guard. I need to see one of those. I mean, left tackle is important. Make Jagasaw or Knapp win that job first in a fair fight. Once you kind of have an idea of whether it's after a week or 2 weeks, like, okay, Knapp's the guy or Jagasaw's the guy, or maybe even Wagner's the guy at left tackle, then you can say, okay, Jagasaw, let's just say hypothetically that Jagasaw, after a week of spring practice, let's say Knapp's back, after a week of spring practice, it's obvious that Jagasaw's the guy there. Anthony Knapp is good enough to where he deserves a shot to compete somewhere. And so then I'm like, okay, let's see what he can do, where Notre Dame originally recruited him with an eye on him playing inside. Does that mean you move him to right guard? Does that mean you move him to center, where you want to create more competition there with Ashton Craig coming off of an injury? I mean, Anthony Knapp is now a more experienced player than Ashton Craig. Way more snaps than what Ashton Craig has. He's not in the system as long, right? In the college as long, but he's played a lot more snaps. And then the other way around. If Knapp proves that he's the guy after a week, it's like, okay, Knapp's just taking a big leap and he's just perfect for left tackle. The issues he had last year, he's worked them out already. He's money there. Then you say, okay, now we need to move Jagus over to right guard and let him be that guy there. It comes down to that. Part of it's that. It's, hey, we owe it to Sullivan Absher to pick a spot for him and let him battle there. Like moving him to right guard or right tackle or left guard. I don't care where it is, but Sullivan Absher deserves to be able to play one spot for at least a time to show what he's got. It's about establishing your center depth chart, and then it's about creating honest competition, because you can't have a team motto of challenge everything, but then say, well, that guy, and that guy are guaranteed to start because what they did last year. Last year's over with. Now it's about who's our best guy this year. Am I saying that means you should bench Emil Wagner? No, but what I'm saying is there should be an honest competition at right tackle where Emil's got to show that he's going to grow on what he did last year. And then because it could go one of two ways. It could be a thing where if he has the jump that he has, like we had a question on the board yesterday, and it was, what's your ideal starting offensive line? And I posited, I gave my answer of what I thought it would be, but then I gave a what if scenario. What if Emil has a big jump this offseason, but Gerby Lambert also has a big time offseason? And Emil makes that jump, Gerby makes that jump, Jagasol's a dude. Is there a scenario say we got to consider with Emil maybe moving him to left tackle, inserting Gerby in the starting lineup at right tackle, moving Jags into right guard, and now it's Wagner, Schrouth, Craig or Knapp, Jagasol, and Gerby on your – I mean, like, the point is, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but the battle needs to be allowed to be had to either say Emil's definitely the guy and that competition made him better, and now we're going to get the best version of Emil next season, or Emil didn't do what he needed to do, or it could just simply be Emil did everything we asked him to do, but Gerby Lambert's just too good not to play. Same thing at left tackle, left guard, center, right guard. A real competition needs to happen to where by trial by fire, right? Iron in, sharpen iron, and all these different expressions you want to use. That's how you got your starting five, because they battled and the five best had to emerge. And if that happens, then I feel good about where the offensive line is going to be next season, Trevor. I really do. Even without some of the things we need to see corrected by the offensive line coach. If those things don't get corrected at all, there will be problems at times. But you should be in such a better position next year where the talent can kind of, like, they didn't all of a sudden become better coached in the second half against Penn State. They just went from having a banged up veteran and a true freshman to a fifth-year senior that was 6'8", 320 and a 6'7", 330-pound elite talent. Coaching didn't change at all. It's just you had better dudes on the field, and you could then go run on. Think about it, rush for 100 yards in the second half against Penn State. So that's where I'm coming from, Trev. It's like if there's a real competition, whatever the results may be, as long as they make the right decisions within that competition, and I'm not even saying what they are. I'm not saying if it's not Jagasol at left tackle, that means Joe Rudolph's not being fair. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that if Anthony Knapp doesn't move inside, that's Joe Rudolph being favoritism to Anthony Knapp. I think there's some issues there, but that doesn't mean that end result is the only thing that it could mean is that. Let a battle rage. Let the five best emerge, then figure out where they all belong and make better decisions. If that happens, I'm very confident this offensive line is going to be really good. It's like Ashton Craig needs to win the starting center job again. He needs to not only beat out Joe Wadding, but I think he should have to beat out Anthony Knapp. I think they should move Anthony Knapp into center and let him compete there, if not right guard. I mean, you see what I'm saying, Trevor? Like, that's where, I even thought of, like, what if there's a world where, like, they move Billy Schrouth to center? He played some center early on in his career and played it in a little bit in high school and in one of the All-Star games. The point is, there's so many options there. There's way too much talent for this offensive line not to be elite next season. And the only thing that could hold it back is you as a coaching staff. That's it. And that's what gets me excited about what this offensive line can be. But as we've seen, that at times that has happened. Trev, where the coaching did kind of hold it back a little bit with some of the decision making they've made.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. I mean, the coaching staff did hold him back to some degree. And look, Notre Dame continues to recruit this position, this group, at a high level. So this is a new normal. This is a discussion that I fully anticipate us having next year. On February 18th of 2026, we're going to be having a very similar conversation. I don't know if it's going to be to the date, but I'd be shocked if guys like Will Black started this year, barring injury.
Yep.
We're going to continue to
this
have
guy's
these same
off to the NFL. That guy's off to the NFL. Let's see the battle rage. It's yeah.
And right now, for me, Joe Rudolph is kind of 0 for 1 in that stance because based on some of the personnel decisions that were made in 2024, this is going to be a new normal for him, for this offensive coaching staff, for this offensive line room. Now is a really crucial moment to see how are you going to start handling this, because it's not going to be as simple as, yeah, we're just going to have Joe Alt start again. Duh. But is it going to be that? Because now Notre Dame's in a spot where they might not just have a Joe Alt, which is a really fantastic spot.
They might have a junior version and a sophomore version. I mean,
right. And so with all these spoils of riches along the offensive line, you're going to have to find a way to, one, conduct a healthy, fair competition in the offseason and follow through on that when the season finally comes. Yeah. Because it can't be something where, this guy just outperformed so-and-so, player A at left guard, but we're going to start player F at left guard.
Because he was there last year or I recruited him or whatever. And again, we're not saying it won't happen. We're just saying what needs to happen. This it doesn't automatically mean, well, I don't think Joe Rudolph's going to do that, so I got to call him out and challenge him to do that. That's not what we're saying. I do think there's history of that not always happening, but we're just saying in general that needs to happen. It just needs to happen. They need to be able to do that and make those decisions. And if they can do that, then I'm very excited about what this offensive line could be. I mean, now there's some other things we talked about, Trevor. They've got to improve in pass pro. And they've got to, improve handling the line games. And there's, using their hands better, finishing better. I think there's definitely a level of finishing better that this line can have. That partly is going to be corrected with better hand play, but that's also sometimes a talent thing. Billy Schrouth, Anthony Knapp, even Joe Otting, who's hasn't done a whole lot, Sullivan Absher, Christopher Tarrick. Those guys are going to all, when they reach their senior years, are all going to be better finishers than Pat Coogan was. And that's not a knock at Pat. They're just better. They're just bigger for most part. They're stronger, just more powerful, I should say. They're more athletic. They're just more talented players. And so that changes partly with that, but there's also a level where improved hand play is also going to help them perform better in that part of the game as well. But so there's certainly some technical things that they return, but the talent is there for this line to be really good. It's just, will you let it happen? And then part of that too is you got to be healthy again. But I feel like you could lose 2 starters this year and you're going to be in a better place than you were when you lost guys last year. You're not going to replace them with 13 and 10 game starters like you did this year, which you have to take into account, but you're going to replace them with guys that are as every bit as talented or as athletic and sometimes bigger in that case. But then the other part is, can he keep everybody happy? And that's been a room that each of the last 2 off seasons, I've heard a lot of grumbling about. They're just not being the level of, that room needs to be tighter than any room in there. And it hasn't been last couple of years. And that needs to be addressed. And if it can get properly addressed and they keep everybody happy and on the same page and the communication is good and everybody knows exactly what's expected of them and where they stand and all that kind of stuff, then this room has the makings of something special. And it doesn't require you to fire Joe Rudolph, because you have to be able to look at Joe Rudolph and have an honest conversation with yourself. And this is what we talked about earlier. I feel like there's not a lot of people willing to have an honest conversation about Joe Rudolph. There's the people that just want to defend him and say, well, they average 200 yards a game. Okay, but why settle for 200 yards a game when they were capable of 230? Why settle for 5.7 yards a carry when they were capable of 6.2? Why settle for giving up X number of sacks when they were capable of only giving up X number of sacks? Why settle for what you saw when what it should have been was better? That's my point. I don't think what we saw this year was the best this line could have done, even with the circumstances that came up, even with the injuries and all the different things. There were still things that should have made this line better had the coaching done a better job. And it's okay to admit that, and that doesn't mean I'm saying Joe Rudolph sucks. It doesn't mean I think that Joe Rudolph is the horriblest coach ever. I use that word intentionally because it's a silly word for a silly argument. It doesn't mean I think he's Jeff Quinn. It doesn't mean that I'm hanging on to the Harry Hiestand legacy and I'll never let it go and no one can ever live up to Harry Hiestand. You don't have to live up to Harry Hiestand because it is not winning the Harry Hiestand award. It's winning the Joe Moore award. You know what I mean? And it's not even about living up to the Joe Moore standard. It's about living up to the Notre Dame standard and making sure that what does that mean? That means I'm getting the most out of my players. Sometimes that's going to look like 2017. Sometimes it's going to look like 2024, and that's the best they could be. Numbers-wise, play-wise, production-wise. My thing, however, is I don't think that's the best that this unit was capable of. And that's the point. Then on the flip side, there's the crowd of people that want to act like everything good that happened only happened because they have a lot of talent. And if it wasn't for Joe Rudolph holding them back, this would have been the best offensive line in the country. That's equally unfair. You can't look at the improvement of footwork and drive through contact, delivering punishment as opposed to accepting punishment, all those type of things. You can't look at those two. You can't look at the team that lost Joe Alt and Blake Fisher and Zeke Correll, who, by the way, was an all-ACC center this year for NC State. You don't lose those three players and your numbers get better just because you're good at running back. Because let's not forget, they had a pretty good freaking running back the year before and still had Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price in that lineup as well. Younger versions, but still talented. You know, so you can't sit there and say like, well, they did all this in spite of Joe Rudolph. There's things that Joe Rudolph did poorly this year. We've talked about them. There's things he has to get better at. We talk about them. And if you find yourself getting mad at me for saying that, look in the mirror and think for a second to say, okay, I'm allowed to hold the program I love to a higher standard and to say that it's capable of even better than what it says without it becoming some sort of attack on the coach of the program. Being a fan does not require blind allegiance. It doesn't. It requires you to love your team no matter what. If you're a parent, when you scold your child or you put your child in timeout or whatever you do to create a level of punishment or to let your kid know that's not okay. We don't act that way in this house. Does that mean you don't love them unconditionally? Of course it doesn't mean that. Because you love them, you demand better. I'm not okay with you getting a C in math class because I know you're smarter than that, and I know that you spent all night last night playing video games. That's why you got a C. Sometimes you get a C and you're like, you know what, buddy? I'm proud of you because you busted your butt, and I know that's that's the best you're capable of. Not everybody is meant to be an A student no matter how hard they work, Trev. We all see it. There's kids that get A's and they slide through because they're just naturally really smart in the subject. And then there's that kid that studies day and night, round the clock, study cards, and he gets a C+. That's the best he can do. It's not about the result as much as did you get the best version of yourself? And if not, why? And when you're a fan of a team, because you love them, because you're loyal to them, you demand that level of excellence. And it's okay to do that, but it's also not about setting this absurd standard of perfection that no one ever can live up to because you liked the last guy better. And I think there's also some of that going on with Joe Rudolph where he's not Harry Hiestand, and so no matter what he does, it's never going to be good enough. Go out and win a national title and run for 250 yards. Yeah, that's because your backs were elite. they ran for 250 on the number one rush defense in the country, who has 3 first-round draft picks in the D-line, and you're going to tell me they did that in spite of the offensive line? I know some people that will make that argument, right? The center ground, the more realistic area is Joe Rudolph did a lot of good things in year 2, but there's still too many things that are on him that need to be fixed and addressed before they can take that next big jump. I'm optimistic he's capable of it because I saw what he did from year 1 to year 2. It was impressive, some of the things that they did this year, especially when you consider the injuries and some things like that. But part of that was on him. Rocco should have never had to step into the lineup. He should have already been there. It should have been Strout at left guard and Rocco at right guard and then Ashton Craig at center, and then there you go. That's what it should have been. That was your decision. It was a bad one. And you put Sam Pendleton in a really bad spot also. You set him up to fail. He wasn't ready for that yet. You didn't do him a justice by what you did. You didn't do Anthony Knapp justice by what you did with him. Not by starting him, but by putting a redshirt freshman next to him to start those games. Those are things he has to correct. And a proper conversation needs to be, he did some really good things. Some things got to get better. Pass pro technique has to get better. Being able to handle line games has to get better. That's a coaching thing. And you can't blame that on talent next year. It's a coaching thing. The players didn't get together and say, hey, here's who we think should start. You did. Make better decisions. So it's about accepting the job he's done, which has been good, and the growth that we saw, which has been good, and still saying, gotta be better, and you're capable of better. And that's where the conversation is. And if we hold Joe Rudolph to the standard, if Marcus Freeman holds Joe Rudolph to that standard, if Mike Denbrock holds Joe Rudolph to that standard, and more importantly, if Joe Rudolph holds himself to that standard, and they make those adjustments and those improvements, and he learns from some of his own mistakes, because any coach who doesn't look in the mirror and say, I should have done better, I could have done better, needs to find something else to do. Because every coach can do that, including Ryan Day, who said, hey, look, we won the title, but what can I do to beat Michigan next year? What did I do wrong to not let us beat Michigan this year? You should all be able to look in the mirror and say, what can I do to be better?
Yeah.
And if Joe Rudolph does that and then makes those proper changes, then this offensive line is going to be awesome because the talent is there, the athleticism is there, the potential's there, the experience is there. What's funny is they're going to be a more experienced offensive line next year than they were this year, despite the fact that they may actually, in some cases, be a little bit younger than the projected offensive line. But if it's the guys we think it's going to be, I think it would be more experienced in every aspect. You could have 3 seniors in the starting lineup, a couple juniors, all those type of things. So those are all aspects of improvement that need to happen. And that's what I'm excited to see is, can he make those improvements? What he did from year 1 to year 2 gives me a lot of hope. It really does. Now it's like, okay, you improve there, keep building there, but now let's improve some of these other areas. And if they can do that, I think this offensive line can be outstanding with Joe Rudolph as the leader of that group. And not because they're in spite of him, but because of him, with him. And that's the key. Because if it's going to have to be in spite of him, then they're not going to be as good as they should be. They're not going to reach their full potential. It requires both player and coach to play at a high level. Yeah. And then it's up to Mike Denbrock to say, okay, this is what I expect of you. This is what I need from you. You got to get him better there. And that's what he needs to do. And that's what gets me excited. I'm genuinely excited about the – I'm not sitting here like, oh, my God, I think Joe Rudolph's going to blow it. I'm not. I'm actually really excited to see. I have some cautious optimism in certain areas because I want to see what he's going to do with certain guys. But it's also a lot more excitement about just, man, I can't wait to see what this offensive line is going to be and what it's going to look like and how good it's going to be. And that's where a lot of my optimism for next year comes. Because if the offensive line is as good as I think it's going to be and should be, then the defensive line is going to be better too. Because they're going to be going up against that every day in practice. Whew. It could be a lot of fun, Trev.
Yeah, and the list for optimism is endless. And I think you hit all the nails on the head perfectly. Joe Rudolph is going to have some things to build upon from 2024. I think that he has a strong foundation moving forward. But nonetheless, there are still some changes that we have to see. But listen, folks, that's going to do it for our preview of the Notre Dame 2025 offensive line. Lots of reasons to be optimistic. There are still some questions that need answered, but the depth and the talent and Rudolph's jump from year 1 to year 2 leaves a lot of room for optimism. Don't go anywhere. We do still have a mailbag. Bryan and I are going to go for about an hour, but before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. We would really appreciate a 5-star review on whatever platform you watch this on. And all the conversations that we're having right now and some of the questions that I've seen submitted are currently going on over in the Champions Lounge on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, folks. So now it is time. We have some submissions in here, some mailbag questions, some statements that Bryan and I are going to cover and discuss. We're going to go until we get through all of them or the time's up, whichever one comes first. But obviously, Super Chats get bumped up to the top, and we'll make sure that we get those answered right away. But we do have some questions in here to get us started on the mailbag, Bryan. First question from Wendell Boner. What does it seem like Al Washington just doesn't reel in big-time defensive linemen?
I guess I don't. I think, why does it seem like that? I would say it seems like that partially because they haven't been as successful as they need to be recruiting the defensive line. That's a fact. I think the other part of it is the success they have had is partly not viewed as such because too many people view success on what is viewed as the best big time by rivals and 247 and on 3. That's another part of it. I mean, we told you guys when Boubacar Traore signed with Notre Dame, we told you he had elite upside. He had raw and had a lot to improve, but we told y'all this kid's got 5-star talent. This kid's got top 25 NFL draft pick talent. He was my number 1 upside player in that class of 2023. And 5-star kid, big time talent. But he wasn't ranked real high. So there wasn't the same level of excitement. You know, you look at guys this year and a guy like Joseph Reif doesn't get a lot of excitement because he's not a big-time recruit. But I'm like, guys, look at the film. The film was really impressive. And I think that's a big part of it is just some of the guys they have landed that I think are really good players. Logan Thomas, 5-star upside kid, raw, 210 pounds as a freshman when he reported, but lots of upside. You have to understand, Notre Dame's going to have to get more of those guys. They're not going to go out there and recruit a bunch of 5-star or top 50 defensive linemen with any regularity. They'll get some here and there, but they're going to have to find the good players with elite potential. Riley Mills, top 150-ish recruit, became a top 100 to top 75 player by the time it was all said and done. They need to find the Isaiah Foskey's. Nobody ranked Isaiah Foskey in the top 200. None of the recruiting services did, but I talked about, Notre Dame talked about others that there was other individuals that evaluated him and said, hey, yeah, maybe he's not that today, but I'm telling you, you look at that talent. I remember talking to Clark Lee. One of the conversations he and I had that I alluded to last week was he's like, dude, I remember when Isaiah Foskey walked into my office. We were still kind of deciding, we're going to recruit him for defense? And he walked into my office and I was like, that is what a big time defensive lineman is supposed to look like. I was like, we need that kid bad. He's like, his shoulders were so wide, he barely fit in the door. You could just see the length and the athleticism. Now, he was raw. Why? Because he was a tight end and a D lineman. And early on in his tenure, a lot of people were recruiting Isaiah Foskey to play tight end. Notre Dame was one of the ones that said, no, you're a defensive end. Now, he didn't do a whole lot as a freshman, played a little bit, blocked the kick, but he didn't really become a dude till down the road. Now, when it all said and done, he played like a top 50 recruit. He wasn't one coming out of high school. Same with Howard Cross in 2023 and that kind of thing. So that's where Notre Dame's going to have to make their money, Wendell, is an evaluation. Find the guys with big-time upside because the 5-star players, here's what's going to happen. Let's say that Notre Dame went out there and said, you know what? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to say our boosters are pulling a Michigan that there's no amount we won't pay for that 5-star stud defensive tackle. So you go out there and you pay that kid $5 million to come to Notre Dame. He's only coming to play for you because you gave him $5 million. He's not bought into the team aspect of it. And here's what happens. If he doesn't play because he doesn't work hard enough to earn it or you have better guys, he's going to jump right in a portal and leave again. If he does play and plays well, he's going to jump right back in the portal again and want more money. That's the reality of it. Now, maybe there's that one kid like that fits Notre Dame and likes Notre Dame, and go get that kid. But you're going to need to make sure that you're finding 2 Riley Millses every year and 2 Bubakars. Find a Bubakar every year. Give me, if every year you're giving me a Logan Thomas and a Bryce Young every year, all right, let's roll. One of them was ranked high. One of them was not ranked as high, but the ceiling was super high. If you're giving me a Bubakar Traore every year that's not a top 200 player that has loads of talent, I can live with that at Notre Dame. Because I don't care what a guy was coming into college. I care what a guy is leaving college. And there's a lot of big-time D tackles that were in the same class as Riley Mills that didn't have nearly the careers that Riley Mills had at Notre Dame. And so that's kind of where I look at it, Trevor, is I think that's part of it too, Wendell. So we can look at it from a twofold standpoint. One, D-line recruiting, especially D-tackle recruiting, does need to get better. I'm actually pretty happy with D-end recruiting for the most part. I think they made a mistake this year not going after Marco Jones. I think they needed more of a true Viper than just Dom Hulak this year. I've admitted that. But Chris Burgess and Joseph Reif as your two DNs, that's really good.
Yeah.
The year before, you got Bryce Young and Logan Thomas and Cole Mullins, who I still think should be playing defensive end. That's really good. The year before that, you got Bubakar and Brennan Vernon, who should still be playing defensive end. You give me that every year, I'm going to be pretty good at defensive end. Real good at defensive end. Now you just need to go get the D tackles to match, and that's going to be a harder pitch. But it can be done. You just got to find the right guys. And that's the area where I think there needs to be improvement, is more at D tackle. But you have to understand that if your sole evaluation is what they're ranked by the recruiting services, you're likely going to always be disappointed with D-line recruiting. If you care more about the film and the upside and the potential, then you'll see that, hey, they're actually further along than you think they are, especially at edge, but they need to get better here. And there's some 5-star defensive ends in the 2024 class that I would have said have much higher floors than Logan Thomas, that deserve to be ranked higher than Logan Thomas coming out of high school. But if you told me both players reach their full potential by the time they're seniors, I could say Logan Thomas will be every bit as good as that guy, if not better. And that's what I care more about. Now, sometimes you need the guy that can help you right now, but that's what the portal's for, Trev. If you need a guy that has to come in and play right away as a freshman or right away to replace, then you probably should look to the portal, not a high school kid. So give me those portal guys to help be the bridge between, this guy and that guy. I can live with that. So give me those kind of guys.
Yep.
Because Al Washington did a bad job recruiting Damian Schenkel. No, he didn't. He needed to do work to get into school, and he had no desire to do it. What are you supposed to do about that? Move on from him. And they did. I just think they should have gone after – if they would have landed Marco Jones in this class, I'd be like, dude, that's as good of a defensive line class as we've seen in a long time. Like, just one guy away. And that's how I feel about it. It's got to do a better job. There. So that's my takeaway on that. Just proper evaluation on both Notre Dame and then us of what the job they're doing. Has Al Washington done a perfect job? No way. Never would argue that. Has he done a better job than I think some people give him credit for? Yes. Now it's fine. Now you've got to step up in areas where you need to step up. And then we as fans need to maybe at times do a better job of evaluating, well, why'd you take that guy over that guy? And maybe realize that maybe Notre Dame and maybe me know more about this evaluation process than On3 and 247. And that's just, that's especially Notre Dame. That's, I think, will help you be a little bit more happy with the results. It's like the 23 and 24 classes. You still think those aren't top 10 classes after what we saw the last 2 years? Or after this last year, you still think those are not back-to-back top 5 caliber classes after what we just saw? Like I saw Athlon Sports, God love them. They put a thing out of the top rosters in college football, and they used recruiting, and they had Notre Dame at like 9th, Penn State at 15th. And it was all based off recruiting rankings. And I'm like, you going to watch Penn State's roster and tell me that's a top 15 roster? You're going to look at Notre Dame's roster and tell me that's the 9th best roster in college football? At some point in time, you got to stop using recruiting rankings to evaluate that stuff. But that's the nature of where it goes, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you completely went off recruiting rankings, Florida State would have had a top 15 roster last season. I mean, it's the nature of the beast.
Yep.
Question from PJC 1122. Of the 3 5-star tackles Notre Dame has landed in the last 3 cycles, who did you have rated the highest coming out of high school?
5-star tackles. Who has Jagasol had the highest floor as a player. He'd be the guy ranked the highest of the three of them. I think Gerby and Will. I mean, I think all their ceilings are similar. I'd say I'd probably go Jagasol, Gerby, Will in that order, because I think that's the order of the floors. I think their ceilings are all very similar. Now, they're different. If you're asking me, okay, who's the best athlete of those three? Probably Will Black. Who's the most powerful of those three? Probably Jagasol. Who has the best frame of those three? Probably Lambert. I mean, they all have different traits where they're all elite, but it'd be, and actually what's funny is it's in the order of when they landed them. It's Jagasol, Gerby, and Will Black. They were off. I ranked them all as 5 stars. So, I mean, you're okay. Which elite player's the most elite? That's what we're deciphering here. You know, I'd say that Will Black's the most natural left tackle of the group. I would probably, and then Jagasol is the most versatile. I think Charles Jagasol, and this is where I think a lot of the debate goes wrong on Jagasol. There's people that want to advocate for Jagasol playing guard, and they start talking about how he can't play tackle. I think that's nonsense. If you want to argue that he should move to guard because I think he could be a top 5 pick at guard, where he's a top 25 or top 10 pick as a guard, but a top 20 pick as a tackle, sure, we can have that conversation. If you're going to try to tell me he should move to guard because he can't play tackle, like, guys, we've already seen enough. I mean, even just the 2 games he's played to say, I got can freaking play tackle. If you want to argue he should be a guard because getting the best 5-man line on the field at some point might determine him playing guard, I can live with that. I mean, if you're going to tell me going into 2026 that I got to figure out a way to have Will Black, Gerby Lambert, and Charles Jagasol on the field together, I'm totally fine moving Charles Jagasol to guard if that means getting those 2 guys on the field. Because I think he has the best guard. He could be the best tackle of that group, but he could also be the best guard in the roster. And so if you want to talk about moving him because of that, I can totally get into that conversation with you. If you want to try to convince yourself that he can't play tackle to make you feel better about moving him to guard, have fun with that, but you're just wrong. The only way you move him to guard is if that's what is going to allow you to get the best 5-man group, and that's what makes Jagasol so special. Because he could be a stud at left tackle, he could be a stud at right tackle, and he could be a stud at both guard positions. The only position I would never play him is center because he's too big. But he could be a stud at all 4 of those other positions. That's the only reason you move him, because you got to get your best 5 on the field, not because he can't play left tackle. That should not be a question for anybody at this point in time. And but I mean, that's what's so great about this group is they're all 3 kind of different, and I think they can play together. And I hope that we see that.
Oh, that would be, yeah.
Yeah, I hope that we see that. All right, let's get to the next one.
Kevin Bill, rewatching the playoffs and noticed Penn State players jumping over the center for a block on field goals and PATs. Is that legal? It is illegal in the NFL.
They got called for that, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
What game? Somebody got called for that in a game Notre Dame played. Yeah, they got called for it. It's on the made field goal at the end of the game.
I don't remember them throwing a flag on it. Now, mind you, I was also pretty wrapped up in the fact that he made it.
There was a play in the playoffs, I thought, where they called that, and it just got waved off because they made the field goal. I could have swore that happened. But you're not – you can jump through the gap, I believe. You just can't go – you can't make contact with the snapper. That's the thing. You can't touch him in any way. But you can leap in through the hole. But you can't leap over him. You can't do that. I'm pretty sure that's the rule. But I'm also uncertain on it because it never gets called. I see teams jumping over the center all the time, and it doesn't get called. So I think there's a little bit of uncertainty for me in that rule because of the way it's called. My understanding was you can come through the A gap, you just can't touch the snapper. You can't in any way contact the snapper. But I don't think you can go over, and you definitely can't use him to launch Because that's what teams were starting to do is they were kind of using the snapper because he was bent over as like a launch to go and block kicks, and you can't do that. I know you can't do that. You just can't. I know you can't touch him. You can't have forcible contact on him. Like if your knees graze, I don't think they're going to call that. But you can't like knock him back. He gets kind of free reign on that regard. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I looked up the definition. It doesn't really provide that much context. I mean, leaping is a penalty in college football. It occurs when a defensive player jumps over the line of scrimmage while attempting to block a kick. It's illegal for them to leap over the line of scrimmage unless they are lined up outside of the tackle box. So I'm not sure. I mean, I see players do it almost every big field goal kick, and it just doesn't get called. So it kind of begs the question of, is it illegal if it never gets called? I have no idea. But that's what the definition says.
Yep.
Joseph Barrett, is the USC rivalry game in trouble?
To a degree, I think so. I mean, everybody's referring to comments made recently by the USC athletic director where she talked about, look, we want to keep this series going, but we should probably do another show on this. I think it's been discussed enough recently. We should probably do a show on this. But she basically said, but we're going to have to do what's best for us. And this is a couple days ago. We're going to have to do what's best for us. And we're going to have to, now we're in a conference where we've got to travel across the country every week. False. It's not every week. You only play 5 road games most years. And usually one of those is one of the West Coast games. But whatever. That's a choice you made to get into that league. But so then she was like, so with the changing landscape and with the fact that, what you need to do to get into the playoffs and all this other kind of stuff, to me, it's the loser mentality that USC has, because anyone with a brain looks at the changing landscape of the college football playoff. Hang on one second. And they're going to look at it and say, look what happened to Ohio State. They lost 2 games and still got in the college football playoff. Indiana lost 2 games. Penn State lost 2 games. Georgia lost 2 games. But you know what a lot of these teams were? They were challenged. They played good opponents. They were battle tested, got in the playoffs. USC is looking at this from the standpoint of what's going to get us into the tournament. Whereas Georgia and Alabama and Notre Dame and Ohio State are looking at what's going to get us into the championship. And so in this era where USC is punking out and LSU is not, I'm sorry, so they drop Ole Miss because they don't want to play like LSU and all these other teams, as they're punking out and saying, let's schedule our way into the playoff. A team like Ohio State and Notre Dame are going out there and scheduling Texas and Alabama and Florida and Texas A&M and teams like that. And that's the difference. So USC is like, well, our schedule's just already tough enough because of our league. And I went I think it's like 5 years out, 3, 4, 5 years out, the Big Ten. There's not one year, because then we got Penn State and Oregon and Ohio State and Michigan. That only matters if you play all 4 of those teams every year. And there's not once in the next 4 years you play 3 of those teams, much less 4 of those teams. And there's only 1 year in the next 5, including this past year, where you play Ohio State and Oregon in the same season. I think there's only 1 other year where you play Ohio State and Michigan in the same season. Because you're not even playing all those teams. You're trying to schedule your way into the playoff. And teams that are looking to schedule their way into the playoff are teams that will get there and get their ass kicked. Because they're not scheduling to be challenged and built. And that's the difference, Trevor, for me, is Ohio State could have said, listen, we got to play Penn State this year. We got to play Michigan on the road. We got to play at Wisconsin. We got to play at Illinois. We got to play at Washington, who's in our league now. We don't need to schedule anybody tough. But who are they playing to start the season? Texas. Next year, they got to play at Iowa, at Indiana, at Nebraska, at USC, home against Oregon, home against Michigan, and they're still going at Texas. 2027, Ohio State plays Alabama, Michigan, Oregon, Nebraska, and USC. I mean, it's home and homes with those 2 teams. It's not like we're playing them once on a neutral field. They're home and homes. And that's the difference. Is it 2030? You know who Ohio State's going to play early in September in 2030? they're playing at Georgia. 2031, they're playing at home against Georgia. That means Georgia also scheduled them. Georgia could have been like, we don't need to play anybody tough out of conference but they do. They've played Notre Dame in recent years. They've played, they're going to be back. Clemson's coming back on the schedule for Georgia. And Clemson doesn't have to schedule anybody tough. We just dominate the ACC. We're walking into the playoffs, but they always try to schedule out of conference because they understand we need those games to get us ready to go win a championship. So we're going to play Georgia. We're going to play Texas Tech in a home and home. We're going to, on top of playing South Carolina. And occasionally we know when we're going to have Notre Dame on our schedule. And that's a difference between teams that understand what it takes to be a champion and teams that are basically cowards and don't understand what it takes to truly build a championship team. Lincoln Riley is a coward. He wants the softest, easiest path to victory. That's why he left Oklahoma, who was going to be leaving for the SEC, and went to the USC. And then USC screwed him over by joining the Big Ten. He wanted to be in the soft Pac-12, where he was always going to have the most talented team, and he could just be, oh, let me show how smart I am. He wanted no part of the SEC. That's why he left Oklahoma. Why else leave Oklahoma? You had a great situation, but you're a coward. Now he wants to get rid of Ole Miss off the schedule, which they did, because you're a coward. You're USC. Go look at who Pete Carroll would schedule every year when he was at USC. They're playing Virginia Tech. They're playing Ohio State. They're playing Auburn because he's not a coward. He knew this is what we need to do to get battle tested to go win a championship. But Lincoln Riley wants to schedule his schedule for success. And that's not how you win. That's not how you win. And so if they want to, and I saw somebody write, Notre Dame needs USC more than USC. Shut up. No, they don't. They need that for strength of schedule. Have you paid attention the last 15 years? Because USC hasn't done jack for Notre Dame's strength of schedule the last 15 years. There's 2 years where they did anything? 2017 and 2022? USC hasn't been good since 2009 with any consistency whatsoever. They haven't done anything for Notre Dame's strength of schedule. So I don't want to hear all this stuff about, oh, well, we need to schedule for success. We need this. We need that. Blah, 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 blah. That's not how it works. And that's why USC won't win. And I don't care people, it worked for Michigan. No, it didn't. It didn't work for Michigan. Michigan was in a 4-team playoff. Michigan was a team that returned to everybody from the year before. They had already been battle tested. And also, as I've always said, the anomaly doesn't prove yourself to be correct. Look at Florida State in 2013, soft schedule. That's almost why they almost got beat by Auburn in that game. They were struggling with Auburn for a while. If that team would have had to play in a 14 playoff, they'd have been in trouble. Look what happened to that Florida State team the next year. When they finally had to play a good team out of conference, Notre Dame almost beat them. And then they went to the playoff and they got the wrong draw, and Oregon beat the crap out of them because they weren't as good as they were super talented, but they weren't a great team because they were never tested. And when you don't get tested, your warts never get exposed. That's the problem. So USC is just showing me that loser mentality that has kept them as a mediocre program since Pete Carroll left. Because they don't understand what it takes to actually build a champion. They go out and buy these coaches and buy these players, and they get the hot names, and they still are underachieving every single year. In a lot of sports that matter. And that's my issue with USC. So it's USC deserves better than their current leadership. I'm sorry. And I don't know if the USC fans in the chat are going to disagree with me on that, but they deserve better. They don't have leadership that understands that tradition. They don't have leadership that understands that program. I mean, like John McKay would play anybody anywhere. He would travel to Bama and play Bear Bryant. I mean, that was also part of the reason that Bear Bryant finally realized, hey, we need to integrate, because USC came out to Tuscaloosa. Actually, it was played, I think, in Birmingham. And just like, okay, we got to change. Maybe being racist isn't helping us out a whole lot. You know what I'm saying? But that's how USC was. There was never talk on all those years. I mean, for decades, USC and Notre Dame both lost chances to win titles because they had to play each other. Neither school was like, is this really smart? No, because they understood to be the best, we need to beat the best. They understood that. But this group of leadership are cowards that want to schedule their ways into success, which might get you to the playoff. But what's going to happen to you is what happened to Tennessee. You're going to get to the playoff and get smacked. So good luck with that, because you played one good team all year. They beat you by 17. You're 11-1. You're hosting, and we got to host Georgia, or we got to host Bama, who played a tough schedule. And that's why they got 2 losses in their and they're going to beat the crap out of us at our place. So scheduling to win your league that doesn't make you a champion. And USC's leadership does not understand what it takes to win. And let's be real about something. Bob Stoops should be paying 10% of his pay every year. Excuse me, Lincoln Riley should be paying 10% of his salary every year to Bob Stoops, because Bob Stoops handed him a gift. And the further and further and further away he's gotten from Bob Stoops, the more mediocre you realize he is as a head coach. Great offensive mind, average head coach. And this is exact example of why. Because he started this whole, let's maybe not play Notre Dame bull crap. Gee, why are we playing Ole Miss? We already have to play 2 tough conference games next year. We can't also have to play Ole Miss. Why? Go 10-2. You're battle tested. You get 3 weeks off to get ready for the playoff, and then you're ready to roll. It's like the best team USC's had in 15 years is a team that started 1-3. They lost to Stanford, Utah, and Bama. But by the end of that year, nobody wanted to play that USC team by the end of the year. Nobody. And if they had a 12-team playoff back then, I would have liked to see what that USC team could have done. But they got tested early. It forced them to make changes because they got exposed early. We can't win with this guy quarterback. We can't win with this guy here. We need to make some changes. And what happened? By the end of the year, they had to go on the road to Washington, smacked Washington, who, by the way, made the playoffs that year. And then they went to play a phenomenal Penn State team in 2016 with Saquon and Chris Godwin and Mike Gesicki and Tracy McSorley. That was a phenomenal Penn State team. The only Penn State team that James Franklin's had that's won the Big Ten, because they were so talented that even James Franklin couldn't ruin that team. Tried, but even he couldn't ruin that team. And I mean, nobody wanted any part of that USC team by the end of the year, but they were battle tested. And that's what got them there, because of that strong early start to the season. But these cowards just want to schedule their way into an 11-1 season so they can get in. Get in and get beat again. Go for it. Have fun with that. If Ohio State let's say Ohio State didn't have to play Michigan this year and they would have played some team that's not that good, they would not have realized we're not who we think we are. They needed that physical butt kicking to kind of wake them up, and that's what sent them on that run. Because if you don't know what your holes are, you're not going to be able to go out there and fix them. Notre Dame needed that butt kicking by Northern Illinois beginning of the year to realize, hey, we're not who we think we are. We got to make some changes. And that's why those type of teams, in my opinion, have success. And when you look at some of the changes that Steve Sarkisian's making with some of the portal additions he's picking up and some of the things he's talking about doing, a lot of it's in response to the fact that they got their butts kicked by Georgia and Ohio State in the trenches. Now we'll see if he can fix it or not, but you need those type of games. But you've got cowards in the leadership positions at USC that are only focused on getting into the tournament, not building championship caliber teams to win it when they get there. That's what I'm talking about. And so that's what's going to hold USC back. So go ahead and cancel Notre Dame and go schedule some soft team. And then when you get Notre Dame in the playoff and get your ass kicked, I don't want to hear anything from you. Because you could have learned that lesson in the regular season, and maybe that would have made you a better team. But that's why I say Lincoln Riley won't ever actually win at USC, because he doesn't have when your head coach doesn't have the mental toughness and the intestinal fortitude to compete at the highest level, you can't expect the players to be that way. Your head coach a coward. How's your football team supposed to go out there and compete at a high level? That's what it comes down to. So, I'm sorry, USC fans, y'all might not like this. I think Roger Dodger sounds like he might actually agree with me a little bit. And he had said that most USC fans want to keep that rivalry. I tend to agree with that from the ones I've heard from. But It's just not going to happen for you with Lincoln Riley as your head coach. I hate to break it to you. It's just not going to happen to you. You need a real head coach. You need real leadership at the AD level too. So, well, the changing landscape. No. Here's the real simple thing. Look, if we want to be a championship team, we know we've got to make sure we're playing teams like Notre Dame every year because that's how we gauge ourselves. That's what this tradition was built on, was playing anybody, anywhere, anytime. That's what Pete Carroll did. Pete Carroll could have scheduled himself a lot easier resumes, a lot easier schedules. But he said, no, we need to make sure we build our team to the point where we can go play anybody, anywhere, anytime. And if you're not willing to do that, then you don't know what it takes to build a winner. Oh, Georgia's just got too tough of a schedule. Well, you know what? Kirby didn't really bitch about it till after the year. Going in, he embraced it. We're going to, this is what we got to do. And it made them tougher, in my opinion, mentally tougher, knowing that each week they're going to be battle tested. And it made them a team that could go in and play Texas in a rematch and win. Because they were battle tested. Texas was not. I don't think it's necessarily Texas's fault that was the case. I think they tried. I mean, look, if Texas would have been able to get like last year's version of Michigan, Texas tried. They played at Michigan. They were down. Oklahoma was down. Florida's down. A&M wasn't as good as you thought. I don't think Texas's schedule was soft because they tried to schedule for softness. But what happened to Texas this year, Trev? They got beat by Georgia both times. They needed overtime to beat Arizona State because they just physically whooped them. And then they lost Ohio State because they weren't tested. They weren't, hey, we think we are this good, but then you realized way too late that you're not that team you think you were. And it's too late to fix it. So that's where I'm at with that one. And so that's my rant. It's my rant for those. They're cowards. They just are. They're cowards. And so that could lead to this rivalry being in trouble. And honestly, if I'm Notre Dame, I'd tell them to pound sand. You want concessions? No, screw that. You want a concession? Then we're going to play the last week of the season every year. Because Notre Dame doesn't need USC's for their – because if they drop USC, they're not going to replace them with Miami of Ohio. They're going to say, fine, we're going to go play we're going to go play Ohio State. We're going to go play Michigan. We're going to go play Georgia. That's who they're going to replace USC with. They don't need USC for strength of schedule. Anyone who says Notre Dame needs USC for strength of schedule has not been paying attention for the last 15 years of college football.
Yeah, that's facts. That's facts. Question from Tom. The Big Ten and the SEC want to enforce changes to the college football playoff to benefit their conferences. Auto bid system for top 4 teams. If this happens, do you see Notre Dame scheduling more Big Ten and SEC teams?
Not more than they already are. I don't think that necessarily you need to do that. You need to play good football teams. They're already scheduling. They're playing Arkansas. They're playing Texas A&M. They've got Florida coming up. They've got Alabama coming up. Didn't they schedule Auburn recently? Like this offseason, they scheduled a home and home with Auburn. That's going to happen in the 30s. I'm pretty sure that that's the case for Notre Dame. But they're already doing that, and they're already playing Big Ten teams. If you lose USC, you might want to say, hey, listen, we're going to replace that with a Big Ten. We're going to do something with the Big Ten teams. I think there's some benefit there. I'd say maybe getting back to playing a couple more Big Ten games a year like you used to. Bring Purdue and Michigan State back on the schedule. I'm open to something like that. I am. But I don't think that Notre Dame necessarily needs to up their SEC schedule because those teams are going to try to get themselves more guaranteed bids, because Notre Dame is also going to have, I believe the new contract is going to be such like this one, where if Notre Dame ranks in certain level, they're in no matter, they're guaranteed one of the 3 automatic bids. So I don't think it's going to hurt Notre Dame. It's dumb, and it's disrespectful to the sport, in my opinion, to do that. And it's why I hate the leadership of the Big Ten and the SEC, but it doesn't have a big impact on Notre Dame. People will convince themselves that it does. I mean, we hear that every time something happens, Notre Dame haters and some Notre Dame fans who are paranoid and believe those idiots always say, well, what's it going to mean for Notre Dame? What's it going to mean for Notre Dame? Oh, no, I don't know what's going to happen. We're going to be forced into a conference now. No, they're not. They're not going to be forced into a conference. They're not going to be forced into any kind of oh, gee, we have to go join the league, anything like that. They're going to still have their, path to the championship, then they'll be fine. So, and I don't think there's any benefit to those leagues trying to bully Notre Dame because they both want Notre Dame in their league. So you try to play hardball with Notre Dame, that's not going to end well. So maybe more Big Ten. I don't think they need any more SEC teams on top of what they're already doing. Plus, a lot of these teams, the SEC teams, aren't going to want to schedule Notre Dame because they're guaranteed bids. So why? There's going to be a lot of teams that they're going to have the wrong takeaway from this, where they're going to schedule soft non-conference games because they're going to think, well, we need to get ready for our conference schedule, where the best teams are going to say, hey, we need a really good tune-up game because if we lose, it doesn't matter. As long as we finish in the top whatever of our league, we're going to be in. So let's get tested. Let's get ready. Let's push ourselves early so we can find out. That's Tom Izzo's had that mindset for decades. Let's schedule tough non-conference to get us ready for Big Ten play because what matters is winning the Big Ten. We win the Big Ten, we're in the tournament, and we're ready to go make a run. That's the mindset that you need. Some teams are going to say, well, we'll just go schedule 3 tune-up games in the non-conference because that's not going to get you ready to go beat Georgia. Battle Notre Dame, see what they do. Because if Notre Dame beats you by 30 and you're finished second in the SEC, you're in. Doesn't matter what Notre Dame did to you or what Ohio State might have done to you. So some teams will take the proper approach from this, others won't, and that means but Notre Dame doesn't need to play a bunch of SEC teams either, in my opinion. I like that they're getting like one a year. I'm good with that. If you're going to add one of the 2 big conferences, bring Michigan State back on the schedule. Put Purdue back on the schedule. Get Michigan on there every couple times every 6 to 8 years. You don't need to start scheduling a bunch of SEC schools, in my opinion.
To me, it just shows the lack of confidence that higher-ups have in those 2 respective conferences that they're going to fight to get automatic bids. If your conference is as good as you think that it is, you shouldn't need to fight for automatic bids. The Big Ten had 4 teams in the playoff this year. The SEC had 3. So I don't really understand the push for it, I guess. I don't know. To me, it just shows the lack of confidence that higher-ups within those conferences have in the teams that they actually have the ability to make it.
Yep.
That's how I look at it.
Agree.
John A1, Marty Biaggi was a dynamic fake kick play caller. The injury at kicker skewed the field goal stats, but overall, what grade does he get for 2024? Where does he need to get better for Notre Dame to have championship special teams?
Well, I think one big thing for me is the punting situation was weird. Like that was my only real big complaint this season was why in the world do you continue to do this weird rugby punt when it's very clear from early on in the season that James Rendell is better at the other thing? Now, the counter argument is Notre Dame finished 15th in the season on opponent punt return average, which was pretty good at 4.2, but that's fine. They were only averaging 4.2 yards on kicks that were traveling 8 to 10 yards shorter than what they would have been if they would have been kicked a little bit longer. Now, sometimes I'm not anti-rugby kicking. Some guys are just better at that, and they're not great hang time guys. So if you're kicking at 45 yards, it's not getting great hang time, only 3.5 seconds, and that guy's got room to set up return. So you're, 45 gross turns into a net 34, 36, 35, where Notre Dame's net, was pretty good because the returns weren't good. But if you have a guy like Rendell who can boom the heck out of the ball and get great hang time on it, and you've got great special teams coverage getting down there, which they do, then you need to do that more. And that was a big complaint I had with their punt coverage this year. It was just weird thing. But their kick coverage this year was elite. I mean, they were 7th in college football this past year on return average. 15.6. But here's the thing, Trevor. The teams that were ahead of them gave up 2, 19, 4, 31, 15, and 21 returns. The teams after them gave up 12, 11, 20, 25, 19, 23, 24, 29, 20. SMU 35 is the next closest. Notre Dame allowed 38 returns. What does that mean? That means a lot of teams were just giving people the 25-yard line. just giving it to them because they're just kicking it into the end zone, giving them the 25-yard line. What Notre Dame did a lot of is, no, we're going to make you return it. And you're only going to average 15 yards, and you're going to catch the ball about the 4, and we're going to pin you at the 19 or the 20. I love it. If you've got that kind of coverage unit, I'm all for that. Now, when certain teams you're playing and they got a real dynamic kick returner, don't be dumb. Kick it out of bounds, especially if your offense is scoring a lot, because you're going to give that guy a lot more opportunities. You're playing George, playing Jaden Harrison, like that probably wasn't a smart idea. There's a reason nobody wanted to kick to him this year. But if you're not going to have a guy like that, then kick it to him and let's see what he can do, because our athletes are better than your athletes. So in that regard, I loved how Notre Dame handled kick returns this season. Is they made you return it because they knew their kick coverage was elite. But here's what they did in the postseason. Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State all got one kick return opportunity per game. That's it. Because those teams for the most part, had more dynamic returners. So we're not going to give you a chance to bust one. But during the season, they did a lot more of make teams return it. USC had to return it 6 times. They averaged 19.5 yards. And USC kept returning it. Whereas a lot of teams just start saying, we know what you're trying to do. We're not going to fall for it. We're going to fair catch it in bounds. USC's guys kept trying to return it, and they kept getting pinned inside the 20. And it was just like, hey, you might want to say something to them about that, but that would require good coaching. And we know what that meant for USC. Like a lot of these other teams, they were going to make you return it. Florida State had 6 returns, only averaged 18 yards a return. It's actually one of the worst performances Notre Dame had of the season. But that's the thing is, like, Penn State had a dynamic return situation. Don't let them return it. They gave them one shot at it. And I don't even know that they necessarily meant to do that, to be completely honest with you. But I think they were really good there. So the punting and the PAT stuff is really it. Because coverage wasn't great the year before. I would like to say I'd like to see them be a little bit more, maybe they could try a couple more kick returns, but I'm with the ball coming out to the 25, I'm less apt to have a guy try to return it from the -2.
Yeah.
If I don't remember, I could be wrong. I don't remember Notre Dame fair catching a kick return this year. Did they? I don't remember it. It was usually just teams kicking it into the end zone, and you're not going to let Jaden Harrison return it from the -3. There's just no point. Yeah, maybe he could house it, but you could also get pinned inside the 17 just in case you're covered. I get that. I was fine with that. I was fine with them not being super aggressive. You're playing the field position battle. I get that. But anything at the goal line or coming out, you're returning that sucker, and that's how it should be at Notre Dame. And then there's some teams where they're not really good at kick returns, and so we want to try one. So, hey, as long as you catch it no deeper than -2, let's give it a shot. That's fine. Other than that, I was a critic of Marty Biaggi from 2023, and there's again, so that outside of the constant frustration with the rugby kicking, outside of that, I thought Marty Biaggi did a really nice job this year in a lot of other areas. You finished 7th in the country in kick return average, opponent kick return average, 15th in opponent punt return average. I thought Max Hurlman, once you finally got him in the lineup, did a really nice job of fielding kicks. He wasn't like a guy that had a bunch of long returns. Notre Dame only finished 105th in the country in return yard average, but they were pretty aggressive in fielding it, not letting it roll. That got better. You could say, hey, let's be a little bit more aggressive there. But with the new rules in punt returns, I'm okay not being super aggressive in punt return because that's where it's more. I'd be more willing to say, hey, let's do a couple -2 kick returns than punt returns, just because the nature of the immediate contact and punt return can result in there's more risk at turning the ball over now with the way that the opponents do their punting coverage now. Maybe a couple times I could have maybe nitpicked. I'd like to see you return it there, but overall, I'm fine with how they do that. So I don't have a ton of complaints right now. The job Marty Biaggi's done this year. I'm much more happy with the job he did this year than I was in 2023. So, and that's even taken out the really great designs they had on fakes. Because how many times did they do that against? Did they do that against Penn State? Did they do it against Ohio State? That's going to help you so rarely that it's cool to have, but it's not something that's going to help you every single playoff game. You used it once and it worked beautifully, but you can't replicate that. You show it once and you can't do it again. And he was mad. He was masterful at designing those things, and Marcus Freeman was great at calling them. And the one they called back against Virginia is still BS. That still should have counted. But I care more about be great at coverage than I do about have great fakes. And I'd say, hey, I'll sacrifice those fakes for better coverage. The good thing about the 24 special teams Notre Dame is I didn't have to sacrifice that for great coverage because they had great coverage and they had the dynamic fakes. And the one time they got a shot to get a kick return, they did it. Was it Luke Talich that had a great block on that? There was a couple guys that had really good blocks on that. But, I mean, their kick coverage was dynamic. I mean, I think it was Penn State where Penn State's guy tried to return one. And was it Penn State and Luke Talich just lit him up? Was that game?
Ate his lunch, yeah.
They got great coverage this year. So I was very pleased with the job Marty Biaggi did this season. Very outside of, again, freaking those rugby punts. That's my only beef all season with him.
Mm-hmm. I'm in the same boat. Ronnie Reeves, should we be more concerned with Gino doing his job great than we are with any other position coach?
No, because I think Mike Denbrock has more of a say in that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for all the reasons that we just listed off in the first couple parts of the show, Joe Rudolph is probably top of the list for me. Mm-hmm. Then, honestly, probably closely followed by Al Washington for what's going to go along the interior of the defensive line. And then after that, it's probably Gino Guidugli is the person that I'm kind of keeping my eye on, too.
Yeah.
Those are my three.
I'd like to see Gino Guidugli do a better job. I don't think he's done a bad job at Notre Dame at all. I don't think he's done a great job. We've seen some slight regression from the quarterbacks and passing areas, to be honest with you. That's concerning. But I think Mike Denbrock will be good enough to he has a role in that from a decision-making standpoint, things like that. But it's just not any – I'm concerned about it, but it's not my number one concern because the OC will have a bigger say in that than the OC will have in the play of the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm with you on that one. We did have a super chat from someone I just banned. Just real quick. This is my show. If I want to talk a lot, I'm going to talk a lot because it's my show. And if you don't like it, you can tune into somebody else's show. But did leave a super chat, so I appreciate that. And we'll read the super chat, and then we'll get back to the others.
You got it. Notre Dame should preserve the USC game. Offer the Big Ten 2 home and homes per year on condition they let USC count odd number year visits to Notre Dame to count towards road trips to Big Ten country.
I'd be fine with that. I'm just not – here's the thing. If you want to do something like that, that's fine. If you already wanted to schedule more Big Ten games – I'm not bending over backwards for USC to keep playing us. If they want to chicken out, I'm going to call them on it. I'm going to hammer them on the recruiting path for it and call them out to be the cowards that they are. I'm not bending over backwards to change my schedule structure to keep USC on there because USC doesn't want to play us anymore. But if there can be some negotiations to say, hey, look, we'll try to work with you on that. We'll try to work with you on the Big Ten to say, hey, listen, can you guys work with us that you know that USC is going to come out here this week in October every year? But here's the way you'd fix that, Trev. Let's make sure that every year we play on the last Saturday of the regular season. Every year, whether we're coming to your place or you're coming to ours. And it's a lot easier for the Big Ten to schedule that week before to give you a home game every year. There, problem solved. And so, but I don't think it's about that. I think the travel is the excuse that USC is using to soften their schedule. That's what I think it is. More so than it is, oh, well, this just travel's just kicking our butt. But if you can have a conversation about it, okay, fine. I'm just not bending over backwards to help USC, make the right decision. If they want out, then let them get out, and we'll schedule someone else, and we'll go continue to be a relevant national program, and USC will continue to be more and more and more irrelevant when it comes to the powerhouses of college football. That's fine. Go for it. Try that. See what happens. I mean, it's kind of like a game of chicken, and almost I'm kind of like, all right, you guys want to go down that road? Go for it. And see how many people show up at the Coliseum to watch you play Rutgers. and watch you play whatever not BS, nobody cares non-conference game that you're going to schedule to replace Notre Dame. Go for it. Go for it. So yeah, I'm not bending over backwards for freaking USC.
It's just so tough. Like for all those reasons, I agree with you. I really do. The frustrating thing for me is I feel like all of Notre Dame's rivalries are just slowly starting to go away, which really stinks.
Yeah.
Like from a fan perspective, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like Notre Dame is going to continue to schedule hard opponents because they believe all the things that you rattled off. But then it's some of the other games too that like I mean, look, is Notre Dame going to have a good season this year? Yep. I don't care they play Syracuse, man. I don't care that they play Stanford. Like that's cool. But I mean, you see it slowly starting to dwindle away to where now Notre Dame's biggest rival that they play is going to be Navy. I mean, like It's a respectable rivalry, but the fact that they don't play on a consistent basis, Florida State, Miami, maybe USC, Michigan State, like all of these teams where it's like, Purdue. Man, like like those are rivalries that it's like, man, I really like that's what makes college football different from other sports, in my opinion. And now they're starting to go away. Now with the USC thing, it's out of Notre Dame's hands. And if they want to be pansies about it, then they can. That is what it is at the end of the day. It just, from a fan perspective, it just kind of stinks. It's frustrating.
I'm with you, Trevor. And especially since prior to this one, a lot of these have been Notre Dame's decision, not the other schools. If Notre Dame was willing to do it, they'd play Michigan State. I think Michigan State would play them every year. I think Purdue would play them every year. Notre Dame chose not to play those teams every year, and for reasons we understand. But if USC is going to get off the schedule, let me ask you this: if USC got off the schedule, Notre Dame said, "Hey, we're going to replace them with Michigan State or Purdue or whoever your favorite rival is, Michigan, whoever your favorite rival is," then okay, that's fine. But also, I'd still say, but I still like the years when they played USC and Michigan State and Purdue every year. I get that. I get that. It's harder now because of the ACC schedule. But yes, we should not be in a situation where your only annual rival or your only opponent you play every year is Navy. And you got us to the point where if USC decides to leave, that's the case. USC is making this final decision, but Notre Dame is the one they made all the others. And some of those I get. As you know, I have no problem dropping Michigan. I have no use for Michigan at all for a million reasons. I don't like the fact that they dropped both Michigan State and Purdue. I've even advocated for, look, if you want to go rotate home and homes with them, okay, but at least one of them should always be on your schedule. So go home and home with Purdue last year and this year, and then the next year you're going home and home against Michigan State, which I actually think they're doing. Right? I do. Isn't Michigan State coming back on the schedule in 2026?
I am.
Let me go look here.
Sure.
They're coming on soon. I know Michigan State's coming on soon, and then Michigan's coming back on in the 30s.
33.
Yeah, 26, Notre Dame is playing Michigan State at home, and then in 27, they're playing at Michigan State and Purdue. So at least that year, Trev, you'll have two of those opponents on there plus Navy. But every year you should have to play at least one of them. That's how I look at it. And then also here's what I would like to see Notre Dame do with the ACC. It's like, listen, we're sticking with you guys, but we want to tear up the previous, we're playing you until this thing. And we want to play Clemson, Florida State, and Miami more.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, right?
Yes.
Which Notre Dame has already said that. Notre Dame has said that. The ACC has said that. That's going to happen more. We want to play one of BC or Pitt every year. Right. And because those are rivals to me, those are rivals. I'd rather play BC and Pitt than play Duke or
Wake Forest.
Right. I mean, I want to play in the Carolinas every year, but give me North Carolina and NC State and occasionally Duke. I don't care as much. I mean, you'll give me one of the Virginia teams, but look, we want to play Pitt or Syracuse every year. I mean, excuse me, Pitt or BC every year. One of those two teams every year. Give us one of those, like traditional Big East rivals with teams that we've played a lot of. I care a lot more about that than, like you said, Wake Forest. If Notre Dame never plays Wake Forest again, I'm not going to notice or care. I do like Notre Dame playing North Carolina. These NC State games have actually been interesting. I mean, it's been every couple years is fine. I don't need more than that. Yeah. Playing Georgia Tech every now and then is kind of cool, but that's a team that Notre Dame's played a bunch. Like, that's an actual rival. You can say, look, we like playing Georgia Tech. We'd much rather play Georgia Tech than Duke or Virginia because Notre Dame and Georgia Tech have history. I think Georgia Tech and Notre Dame have played, let me look this up, Trev, one of the highest game numbers that Notre Dame has against an ACC team. So they've played Georgia Tech 38 times. And they've played Stanford 37 times. The only other team they've played more than Georgia Tech in the ACC is Pitt, who they've played 72 times. So there's history there. Give me that game. I don't care about playing Wake Forest. I don't care about all of a sudden getting Cal on the schedule. I don't care about all of a sudden getting SMU on the schedule, although that'd be one. I'd rather play them than Stanford for reasons we've discussed. That would mean more to me. Syracuse is fine every now and then, but like there's not a lot of history there. They've played 11 times. It's not like BC or Pitt. Notre Dame's played Pitt, as I mentioned, over 70 times. Let's see, was it 72 times? They've played BC 26 times. That's not as many as I thought. But over the last 30 years, they've played a lot more. I care more about games like that than I do some others. So I would actually talk to the ACC about that. And then to your point, Trev, now you feel like there's some tradition still built into the schedule that maybe they haven't had in the past. And that would make me happier. I'm with you on that. That's a good observation. Good point.
John A1, in 2024, Jeremiah Love, Xavier Watson, Riley Mills were stars. In 2023, Audric Estime, Joe Alt, and Mitchell Evans, Ben Morrison, and Xavier Watts were stars. How many players will play like stars for Notre Dame in 2025?
Oh, man. Hey, buddy, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a gambling man, and I'd be a lot wealthier than I am. Here's my predictions. Some guys that I think are in the category. This is actually – we normally do a show about star power as we get closer to the season. I think it would be good to do like a pre-spring one because I do to John's point. The reason it's a great question is we've talked about in the past. You need stars to get to the championship. You need stars when you're not going to have just a bunch of try-hard guys that may get you to the playoff and maybe even get you a win. But you want to get past the first round of beating Indiana. You want to beat Georgia. You need stars. Well, guess what Notre Dame had in that game? They had some stars, played like stars. Riley Leonard played like a star. We saw that, right? Penn State, we saw multiple guys. So, Ohio State, we saw that. But you need guys to play like stars. Who are the guys that I think are the top candidates for that? Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse at receiver. Charles Jagasaw, maybe Billy Schrauth on the offensive line. And then obviously you have your backfield. Jeremiah Love is a star. Jadarian Price gives you star production on a per snap basis. Like your running back room is the best in college football, in my opinion. And then he's got a long way to go to get there, but I think Eli Raridan has some of those tools.
Yes.
And
yes.
by the aggressive agreement that Trevor just gave, sounds like we're on the same page.
Yes.
Yeah, he's got that. Defensively, Trev, I think Boubacar has star potential. Bryce Young has star potential. Is it going to happen this year or next? We'll see. Maybe a Josh Burnham. Inside, I don't see any stars. Just a lot of good players. Linebacker, pick a guy in the rotation, and he's got a star power. If I gave you a piece of dice and it had all the linebackers that I expect to be on the rotation with it, and you say, okay, will they start? I'm like, yes. But what if I roll? Yes. It's literally going to, no matter what comes up, you got someone with star power. Drake Bowen, Kingston, Madden, Jaden Osbury, Jalen Sneed, it doesn't matter. You've got potential star power. Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler. It's a lot of candidates that can be stars, like genuine stars, not just good players, but stars. They all won't. Well, I could say this. If they all do, they're winning the championship this year. But not all those guys are going to play like stars. It's just. That they're going to win the title and not have a competitive game. But you need 2 to 3 minimum of those guys on a consistent basis to be that. We're not talking about a guy that has that one great game, but these are your stars all year. And then occasionally somebody else has got to step up and play like a star in that game. Or in that moment, like RJ Oben with the sack or Jaden Harrison with the kick return or think Aeneas Williams against Penn State stepped up and played like a star at times. But you need your normals every week. This guy's a dude. And then occasionally hey, Jordan Faison looked like that this week. Or KK had it this week. Or, whoever, somebody like that. But you need your regular dominant players. Yeah.
Agreed. John A1, offensively, is there a skill set and player type that is missing or lacking to a degree that would keep the offense from playing for a national championship in Denbrock's offense? Assume coaching is perfect.
Is there a skill set or player type? Based on what we know about this team, I'd say yes. Look, because here's what. We know what Malachi Fields can do. We know what Jaden Greathouse can do. Those are great. But I'd feel even better about this offense if we knew they had a burner. And that's why we talked about, was it Bison Hold, Trev? That's why KK and they don't even have to step up and be the guy. They could just be that 25 catch for 500. Basically what Braden Lindsey should have been in 2022.
Facts.
You know what I mean? It's like Braden Lindsey should have caught 35 balls for 700 yards that year, as much as he was open down the field. They just never threw it to him. It was so wild. Like, I don't think that's why I say I wish we could do just have sit downs where we have all the IB people come over and we pop in the projector and do all 22 breakdowns. And it's like, this is what I'm talking. I should start putting some of those plays on now that we have all 22. I'm gonna start putting some of those plays on. But I didn't have all 22 access in 2022 because I could have showed you a lot of times where Braden Lindsey, and not just open by a step. I mean, open by 4 or 5 yards down the field, and they wouldn't throw him the ball. Even the South Florida game is an example where people saw it, where he was open. I mean, that's an 80-something yard touchdown right before halftime, and Tyler just missed him. Give me something like that, and I'll feel like this offense can really take it to that next level. But talent-wise, a quarterback, they've got it. Running back, they've got it. Impact receivers, they've got it. Tight end, they've got it. O-line, they've got it. It's the one ingredient. It doesn't have to be the go-to guy. They don't need Will Fuller. If you have him, great. I'm saying you don't need Will Fuller when you've got Malachi, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, stuff like that. But to have that element of, even if it's just a 25 catch guy that can be that big play weapon to really scare teams. Look, if you want to put all those resources into coming downhill and stopping our run game, fine, because this cat over here can end your life with two plays, 2 catches. Can end any chance you have at winning this football game with 2 catches because you decided to go one-on-one. It was just a silly move. And so KK just torched you, or Cam Smith just torched you, or whatever. Having that kind of guy is huge. Huge. Now, can they still be an elite offense without it? Yes. But I'd say that's the one thing that would make me feel even better, is having that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, just a burner on offense. That's it. You got 2 solid possession catchers in Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse. So, yeah. Archer 452. The Notre Dame offense is more explosive in the pass game, but takes a step back in run game productivity in 2025, resulting in more explosive pass plays, but a drop in short yardage conversion rate.
I feel like this is almost kind of like a Bison Hold submission.
A little bit. Yeah.
Because it's. I mean, are you telling us that will happen, or are you asking if that could happen? It could happen, but I don't think that it will. I mean, I think Jeremiah Love's a pretty good short yardage running back. His success rate in short yardage situations was really good. They just removed some of that pounding from him because Riley was also really good at it, and he was a little bit bigger body type. I see Kedron Young taking on some of that role. I think Notre Dame's going to be a little bit more effective in short yardage throwing the ball this year than they were last year. You just didn't really want to throw it a ton there. If you didn't have to. 4th and 5, you'd throw it more because you had to. 4th and 1 or 2, I don't remember them ever throwing it in that situation. I'm sure they did. I just don't remember it. But it's possible, but I don't think that if anything, I think if the offense is more explosive in the pass game, I think the run game productivity gets even better because they're going to get more yards with the same number of carries, if not fewer carries. Because the thing is as good as Notre Dame's offense was this year, Trevor, a big reason why Notre Dame ranked where they ranked in like the number of plays. I'm going to see if they have Notre Dame this year ranked third in college football in total plays because they played more games. I'm going to see if I can find a way to look and see if there's a metric on I can see plays per game. But the problem that Notre Dame had is, yes, they had the big plays, but the other thing that hurt them, Trev, is they were not very good on third down. And that caused them to have a lot of drives stall that otherwise they would have been able to get to. And I think if you can improve in that regard, then all of a sudden I think your football team is going to be better. And I think that's kind of what I want to see from this offense is, and that's where you can maybe have even more attempts while also throwing the ball more. But I could see the number of plays per game not really changing a whole lot because they're just more efficient with it. So Jeremiah Love still has, 1,200 yards next year, but he does it on 10, 15 less carries because your offensive line's more efficient. Or, you don't have as many minuses this year. Jerian Price's numbers don't change a whole lot, but he does it on, or maybe he gets the same number of carries, but he gets 60, 70 more yards because there's more efficiency there. So I just think if the pass offense is more explosive, I think the run game will be even more dynamic because you'll have to defend it differently. You're not going to be able to put 8 in the box and play the numbers near the line that you did this year if the pass game's explosive. Like legitimately, it's not like explosive like it was in 2023 where Notre Dame had a ton of big plays in the pass game in 2023, like a ton of big pass plays in 2023. Notre Dame in 2023, Notre Dame ranked 13th in college football in pass plays of 40 yards or more. They ranked 13th that year in plays of 30 yards or 40 yards or more. Well, most of that came against teams that weren't very good. I mean, if we're being honest about it, Notre Dame that season had, 2 pass plays of over 70 yards that season. They had 5 pass plays of over 50 yards that season. But they weren't against anybody good. They were against Central Michigan, and they were against, teams like that. They were against Pitt. They weren't against Clemson. They weren't against Ohio State. They weren't against Louisville. They weren't against Duke. They were against teams that stunk. They had 2 70-yard touchdowns against. I think both of the 70-yard touchdowns they had in 2023 came in the same game against Central Michigan. So it's like, whatever. I don't care about that. You should be able to do that against Central Michigan. You're Notre Dame. So when I think more explosive, I think like genuinely like what a real explosive offense is supposed to look like, where you're doing that against everybody to some degree. And then I think that makes the run game more dynamic.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think that their conversion on short yardage is still going to be high. I just think it's going to look different. It's not just going to be QB power, QB counter.
Right.
It's just going to look different. If there is one number that I think could take a step back, and when I mean a step back, I mean a minor step back, it is their explosive run plays. I think they're going to be more efficient runners, but Notre Dame ranked in the top 10 in rushes of 20, 30, 40, all the way up to 90 yards. They ranked in the top 10 outside of 10-yard rushes where they ranked 20th. Mm-hmm. I think they go up in 10-yard rushes. I do, like rushes of 10 or more, but I just –
because once they got past the linebacker step, they were gone. It was going to be a touchdown. It wasn't going to be an 11-yard gain. You know what I mean? It was if you got past 10, you were going all the way.
Yep.
Sorry.
Well, which and they're still going to have that explosive to them because Love and Price both come back, but I just don't see Notre Dame's offense ranking 76 in pass plays of 30 yards or more because they had 16 on the year. So if there is one that I could see, it would be that. Not predicting it to happen, but I would see the explosive run plays dipping before I see short yardage conversion rate, just because it's
opportunity
just going to
is what
different.
You're saying,
Mm-hmm.
Trev. It's opportunity. You're going to throw the ball more, and some of those 50-yard run plays are going to now be 50-yard pass plays. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Good questions.
PJC 1122, Brian, who is on your short list of DB coaches you'd want Freeman to look at in the future if he has to replace Mickens, and how close are they to him in ability to develop and recruit?
So I brought this question up not to intentionally dodge it, but to make a bigger point about how I view it. There are times when, like, okay, this is the guy you need to go hire. But my bigger point is they're not. There's not just one guy that can get the job done. It's either this guy or they're going to suck. You know, if Joe Rudolph left tomorrow for the Bears, it's not like if they don't hire Harry Heaston, their offensive line's going to suck next year. Like, I would always have Harry Heaston on my list. But I think Coach Heaston's comfortable in retirement. It's not like, okay, he's gone. There's no better. There's good offensive line coach. And it's not just like, if they don't bring so-and-so in, they're done. They're not going to be good on the O-line. There's several guys can do it. Jawan Sider was not my only guy on the list that could be a home run hire. Tony Alford was on that list. Stan Drayton, I thought, would have been a great hire. And by the way, kudos to Penn State, who also lost a big-time coach and replaced him with a really good position coach. So they both did very well replacing a departed coach. So there's a group of guys. It's imperative that you get someone on Mickens' level. Is he the only coach that's an elite defensive backs coach? No, I just think he's the best. When you look at what's required at Notre Dame, like, he can't just go out there and get 5-star corners every year that are easy, no-brainer evaluations. Those guys aren't coming. Naeem Offord's not coming to Notre Dame. He's got to go find the Leonard Moores and the Benjamin Morrisons and guys like that, and he does it all the time. And then he's elite. He's an elite position coach. He's an elite developer. I don't know that he's the only one out there, but that's the one position coach on the roster. And the reason I want to say this is that is the one I'm most concerned about, because I think that's the position where they're going to have the toughest time finding someone who's as good as him as an evaluator, recruiter, and a teacher of the position. That would be the most challenging out there. But is there a list of guys that could do it? Yeah. Do I know who all those guys are right now? No, I don't. And that's something that I've changed a little bit over the years, is I would lock into a coach that I knew, and I would be like, you got to hire this guy. You got to hire this guy. And if they didn't, I'd be kind of mad about it. And that was very short-sighted, because I'm not just because now, do I think the guys that I had in mind would have been great for the job? Yes, I do. But it's more so realizing, like, hey, man, you have your knowledge of who you know. He's got his knowledge of who he knows. That guy's also a good coach. And that's kind of how I'm trying to look at it now, is like, look, there's a lot of good coaches out there. If Mike Mickens ever left, I'd probably put together a list of guys that I would like to see him go get. And actually, you know what? That's something I'll probably work on this offseason. It's kind of have a list of that. But the point is going to be is there are other guys that could do the job extremely well. Could anyone do it quite as good as Mickens? That's going to be tough. But it doesn't mean that they can't do it extremely well. But here's the difference. If Mike Mickens leaves in a year, just for argument's sake, it's going to be so much easier for that guy to come in to recruit the even better players because of the job that Mike Mickens has done. He's changed the game and the position for Notre Dame. And he kind of had to take over and build it from scratch. The next guy is not going to have to build from scratch. He's going to just keep building on what Mike Mickens has built, which changes that a little bit. So I don't have a short list right now. I'll eventually get one. But the bigger thing is there are guys that can do the job, and it's up to Marcus Freeman to make sure he finds them. And recently, I think his track record of that has been pretty good. We'll see if the D coordinator one was. But position, I mean, think about his most recent position coach hires. Jawan Sider, Mike Brown are the most two recent. I think are both very strong hires. You know, Dylan McCullough, was a strong hire. I mean, he's everybody makes some hires you don't love. Jared Parker was a very good tight ends coach. Wasn't a great OC, but he's a very good tight ends coach. Well, Gino's a bit of an unknown. It's kind of it's we have the thoughts we have, but it's almost like we haven't had a chance to see Gino take a high school kid and develop him. That's different than having to bring in some finished product and now I got to learn what he does and try to adapt to him. That's a little bit different. Maybe he's not great at that, but he's really good at taking a young guy and developing him. We don't know. It's hard to really evaluate Gino in that regard. No, Joe Rudolph's a good coach. Al Washington's is a good coach. Max Bulla was a great. Well, that's the other one. His last 3 position coach hires are Mike Brown, Max Bulla, and Jawan Sider. Those are 3 strong hires, very strong hires. The only bad hire he made as a position coach, like bad hire, was Chancey Stuckey. I mean, that's the only bad one he's made, and that was because he allowed his coordinator to make that hire. And I don't know that he's going to allow his coordinators to have the final say the way that he did when he first got hired. That's part of the lessons you learn as a head coach.
Yeah. And
that's one of those ones where he did for Tommy Rees what he wanted his head coach to do for him when he was a coordinator. And then you realize not everybody's you. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you're the head coach, you're next on the line. You got to go out there and make the hire that you think is best.
Yeah, that's facts.
This is more of a comment than a question, but Frank G says, "Let me start by saying that I love to hear the news. Love to hear the news that Coach Mickens is returning for this season, but was also a little bummed he didn't get a DC job somewhere. I feel like he earned it. Yeah, I get that. For Mike Mickens personally, you're bummed he didn't get that D coordinator job, but selfishly as a Notre Dame fan, I'm happy that everybody else, well, I shouldn't say the schools that he might want to go to were not willing to give him that opportunity, but it's going to benefit Notre Dame a ton. Appreciate that comment.
Zach Nichols, Brian, your upgrade of Aeneas Williams was based on certain physical projections.
I think it's Emil Wagner.
Oh, okay. Emil Wagner was based on certain physical projections. If he makes normal year-to-year physical progressions, what do you estimate his upside grade would be now?
Same. I mean, look, Emil was a redshirt sophomore this year. That means he still has 2 years of eligibility left. Mm-hmm. So I still think he has the makings of, like, if Emil Wagner stays at Notre Dame, can he become the next Liam Eichenberg at right tackle or maybe even left tackle? Yeah, I think he can get to that level. Liam Eichenberg was a consensus All-American. That's a 5-star player. Because, again, I don't do rankings off of what you're going to be in the NFL because I don't care. Like, I don't care that Tim Tebow was an awful NFL quarterback. It doesn't change anything he did at Florida. He was an elite college football player. That's what ranking should be about. What kind of college football player were you? And so, yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at. But Liam Eichenberg became a 5-star player. His upside was that of a 5-star player, and he became that. First 2 years as a starting offensive lineman were good. His last year was elite. And that's the upside part. When you tap out your potential, this is what you can be. I absolutely think that Emil Wagner could become that type of player. Will that be 2025? That's a big jump from what he was this year to that. But being a bet, like, so let's say we felt like, would it be safe to say that this year Emil Wagner played like a top 200 caliber player, top 250, 200 caliber player? Is that fair? I don't think I could say he played like a top 100 player because we saw him struggle in the playoffs when he was playing other top 100 players. I'd say he played like a top 250 guy. In year one as a starter, that's not bad. Next year, I expect him to play more like a top 100 to 150 guy. Maybe a top 100 guy. And then as a fifth-year senior in 2026, then that's when I expect him to be like, okay, now I expect you to just kind of be a dominant player week after week after week. I expect you to be a Liam Eichenberg in 2026. I expect you to be that kind of guy because there's different levels of eliteness, right? I mean, just because Liam Eichenberg wasn't Joe Alt doesn't mean that he wasn't a great player. That's it's like anything. There's top 25 players, 25 elite players, let's say. Just because 25 isn't like number one doesn't mean he's not elite because number one is unique. He's rare. He's special. And, he could be a Liam Eichenberg type of big time All-American player. He could be a Mike McGlinchey type, different skill set, but Mike McGlinchey was a really good player. He was not Ronnie Stanley. He was not Quentin Nelson, right? I mean, those are elite, like you're generational. Quentin Nelson was a generational player. They haven't had a guard like that in a while. Neither has anybody else. I mean, that's that you're not facing the next Quentin Nelson because nobody has that guy. And so I don't, my upside of him has not changed at all. I was encouraged by the fact that he was able to hold up for an entire year at 291. Yeah, I see a few more, a little more, but it's more about the strength and the technique. If he gets his technique down, he'll be really good, really good. And that's why I'd like to see him maybe get a shot at left tackle. If you think, maybe if Gerby's ready to take over, maybe you slide Emil over to left tackle, move Jagasaw to right guard, and now you've got 2 6'7", 320+ pound guys on the right side of your offensive line. Nate, that answers Archer's question earlier about short yardage. No, they're good. They're just going to run behind Gerby Lambert and Charles Jagasaw, So, yeah, that's funny. And I believe this is going to be the last question. I haven't seen it. I do want to bring this up real quick. RFA, real quick. I don't want you to think we're dismissing your question. We don't project transfers. Your question is fair, asking about, maybe some spring portal additions. I just don't think it's fair for us to predict that. I don't know who's going to transfer. I mean, in my head, I have some ideas, but I just don't think it's productive for us to have that conversation. I'd rather just let those young men make whatever decisions they want to make, and then we'll address it when it happens. But I'm not, and others can do that. That's their convictions. That's what they choose to do. I'm just saying for myself, for Irish Breakdown, that's not something that we do. Fair question, but and I know you're not the only one that's thinking that. That's why I wanted to bring it up and address it. It's just not something that we really do here. I don't like spending time on hypotheticals when it comes to something like that. I just don't think that's fair to create that conversation. That's just my stance on this. So I just want you to understand why I'm not bringing that question up. But it's a fair question. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just we get that every week, and not everybody hears that. So it's also for the benefit of others who are thinking the same thing that you're thinking. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. I'm not ignoring your question. It's a fair question. We're just not going to address it. And then now we're ready for the last one from Mark Avalon.
You got it, Mark. Mark Avalone, to compete best for defenses like Ohio State with great D-lines and linebackers, can an offense be undersized but athletic, or do you think they need the beef and height to have a realistic chance?
Both. This is one of those ones, Mark, and this is a good question, but it just depends on who you are. What system are you running? If I'm running a pin and pull scheme, I can't be undersized and athletic, because pin and pull, you've got to move people on those down blocks. You need a little bit of beef to move those guys. You don't necessarily. What's funny is a lot of those pin and pull offenses, they're not always the most athletic offensive linemen, because a lot of their pin and pull is all short stuff. It's quick traps and wraps, and it's not like buck sweeps, where Notre Dame was running pin and pull in 2023. It was a lot of long stuff. It was getting guys outside as opposed to a quick power, a quick counter. If you're going to be a team that's going to run a bunch of counter, a bunch of power with the traps and the pins, you got to have beef. Now, if you're going to run a million buck sweeps, then that's a little different animal. You can be a little bit more athletic because now you're getting out in space. But a traditional kind of pin and pull where you're running a lot of wraps, a lot of darts, a lot of counters and things like that, a lot of power, you need beef. If you're going to be a team that's running a lot of zone, depends on how you run it. If your inside zone is just pure downhill, one step, get downhill, cut back, you need a little bit more beef. If you're going to be a team whose inside zone is a little bit more mid-zone-ish, and then you counter it with some stretch, not like Notre Dame's outside zone and inside zone requires a little bit more power, because none of it's we would call it fast swipe and slow swipe. Inside zone is it's a slow swipe. It's power. It's vertical. It's not as much athleticism like the Broncos. Notre Dame's version now is more about power. That's why Harry Heastan was an inside zone coach who wanted bigger guys, because it was more power, double teams, verticals. Other inside zone teams will have little wider splits. It creates a little bit more of a mid-zone look, because the wider splits allow you to attack at a different angle that creates more creases, even though you're not mid-zone, which is more of attacking, more of like the inside hip of the tackle type of thing. And then their outside zone is a pure off-tackle play, where other teams will run more of a pure stretch. Like the Broncos, their outside zone was, you were going to stretch it all the way out, man. It was just a different type of outside zone. That team could be more athletic. An inside zone team can be athletic and undersized. It's like anything else. What type of inside zone are you doing? Notre Dame's is more of a power inside zone. Chip Long's was more of a big play type of inside zone that, even Harry Hiestands was a little bit different, but the way Chip called it, he wanted a little bit more of an athleticism front side and then power back side, which is why they ran it a certain way. But that's kind of how it just depends. Notre Dame's version of it, you need to be athletic, but beef is more important than being like they'll take a good athlete at 320 over an elite athlete at 295. Just in theory. Now, sometimes the 295 guy is more powerful than the 320-pound guy. And that's fine. But just in general, when you think of the stereotypes of a 325 guy compared to a 295 guy, they're going to want a solid athlete at 325. Now, what you don't want is a zone team is a slow-footed, heavy-footed, big mauler that can't move. That's when you got to be running power and counter where he's just down blocking, just bullying somebody. When you're running inside zone with bigger guys, you've got to get them up to the second level. They've got to go back block. They've got to reach block. You need some level of athleticism, but you don't have to be an elite athlete either. It's technique and all those type of things, movement can all happen to that. Notre Dame's version, you need guys that can move, but beef is very important than maybe some other zone teams, especially the outside zone, because their outside zone is a physical run also. It's not a pure stretch. They don't stretch the outside zone like a lot of teams do. There's a level of stretch to it, but it's, you know what I'm saying? Like Trev, it's more of a downhill, hit it quicker. They want to cut it back where outside, and that's why they get downhill so much, where other teams, their stretch is like, they're going to take that sucker all the way out to the numbers if they have to. That's not how Mike Denbrock runs it. Which is also why I say I want to see them have a more pure outside run, because I don't count their outside zone as an outside run. It's an off tackle run.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that they need to add. So I hope that answers your question, Mark. For Notre Dame specifically, I think it has more to do with beef, but beef that can move a little bit. Doesn't have to be elite movers, but you got to have, like, you don't, like Pat Coogan and Morocco Spindler aren't the ideal zone lineman in Mike Denbrock's offense, but he can win with them more so than if he has an undersized guard who's athletic but can't move people. Anthony Knapp's not the good example for that, because Anthony Knapp's undersized, but he's really powerful. Like, there's a difference there, but just a typical guy, if that makes sense. So I hope that helps answer that question a little bit. So I don't know. Did that make sense, Trev?
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
Then we're good. We're all done.
Good deal. Well, all right, guys. That's going to do it for us here on today's show. Bryan and I will be back tomorrow. It's Wednesday. You guys know what that means. Salty already has the thread up on the board, but we have our buy-sell hold tomorrow at 1. Does IB Nation Sports Talk go live tonight?
I believe so. I don't know that. Let me just go check real quick. A lot of it depends on. Yes, they have a show scheduled tonight for 5:00.
Okay. Well, in about 8.
They're going to talk about the expanded college football playoff, how that's going to impact Notre Dame. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Perfect. Well, they'll be live here in about 7 minutes, but that'll do it for Bryan and I until tomorrow at 1 p.m. Before you guys head out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know when we go live. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame football and college football as much as you do. Whatever platform you watch us on, whether it's Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it. And all the conversations that we've had today are currently going on over on the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com in the Champions Lounge. But for Bryan, I'm Trevor. We will see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.